Part 1. Roll Call. Children are not things to be molded, but are people to be unfolded. They came from all walks of life, both humble and grand, but they all came for the same purpose. The kindergarten took them, molded them, folded them, and either brought out their full potential or sent them below forever. Wherever they went, the results were the same. No one escaped the kindergarten in the end. Well, except one, I suppose. Chapter 1. Masha. Masha was a prodigy. At 3, she was capable of reading any of the cardboard books in her playroom, and by 5, she was reading many of the books on her mother and father's living room shelf. Whether she understood all the books she read was something her parents would never know, but they secretly thought that she was taking in all the scientific theory and engineering studies that lay between the covers. She seemed to be, at least, but who can really be sure what goes on in the mind of a child? At 5, she could do math at a rate that most third graders would have found impressive. Her father discovered this when he found her doing fractions on the whiteboard he kept in his study. He wanted to be upset. Some of the schematics he'd been sketching were important to his upcoming project. But once he realized that she was solving mathematics that should have been beyond her, his anger had been hard to maintain. At 5, she could name all 50 capitals and states that they belonged to. At 5, she could make the pictures on the TV dance and swirl with nothing but her mind. That last one had been a little harder to quantify than the rest. But Masha was a prodigy, and she could do things that the doctors didn't quite understand. They had taken her to specialists, taken her to researchers, but no one seemed to be able to explain how she did the things that she did. They didn't think it was something to be alarmed about, and it might be something that she would outgrow in time. Her parents hoped the flashing intellect wasn't something she would outgrow in time, but not even they could predict the depths of her abilities. Masha, at 5, had something that she didn't dare tell anyone, not even her parents. When the men from Caltech came to speak with her parents, the pair of MIT graduates didn't understand everything they talked about, but they understood that certain people had recognized Madeline Ariel Sanderson Habersha, Masha for short, was a gifted child and deserved to be in a place with other gifted children. They were offering her a place at their research center in California, and her father had made jokes about sending his only child to Xavier's School for Gifted Children. Through it all, Masha sat between her parents and took it all in. She could speak French and Spanish as well, could read and regurgitate the classics, but she knew that none of her academic achievements were important to these two. They wanted her for the TV trick, but there was more to her trick than that. Sometimes Masha could read minds, nothing that she could strictly control, but Masha had known where to find the Christmas presents last year, when her mother had hidden them in the crawl space instead of her bedroom closet like she usually did. The year before that, she had started crying unexpectedly, saying that she knew there was no tooth fairy. The idea of a grotesquely fat man coming down her chimney to eat her cookies had been horrific to her, but knowing that fairies were make-believe had shattered what little magic lived inside her Philistine's heart. She could get little snippets from Dr. Schuler, the man talking with her parents, but from the man who identified himself as Cal, she got nothing. It was like watching TV static when she looked at him, and the feeling of it made her skin crawl. If she'd been able to peek below his surface, she might have been less sure of herself as she sat between her smugly intelligent parents. She would have seen his true intentions, and their jig would have been up, as her father often said. One look inside Adrian Cutter's mind, and Masha would have been very, very afraid. Dr. Gladdy had been happy to chatter like a bird with the enthusiastic parents, but Cutter was content to sit back and listen. He didn't like the way she looked at them. Cutter had been doing this for quite a while, and he knew that look that now spread across the girl's face. He had told Gladdy to wear his thinking cap, the scratchy metal lid that fit snugly beneath his wig, but the old fool had refused. "I don't like the way it messes up my hair," he'd said. "Besides, Mrs. Habershaw's a technicog, not a telepath." Messed up his hair. Cutter had to scoff at some bullshit like that the hardest. If his time in Iraq had taught him anything, it was bald was best. Cutter turned to look at the little freak and was unsurprised to see her staring at him, showing her his missing teeth as the little bookworm he often traveled with poured honey into her parents' ears. The black sites had pairs that went out for extractions, and they always called them toolboxes. Every toolbox had a hammer and a screwdriver, and Gladdy was one of the best screwdrivers at the site. Screwdrivers were for delicate situations, something you needed to turn slowly and not be too rough with. That being said, people sometimes forgot that a screwdriver was just a knife with a hex on it. Cutter had seen Gladdy do amazing violence to people, and it was always because he had a very trustworthy face and a very soft-spoken nature. Cutter was 280 pounds of slab muscle, but Gladdy could get in places that Cutter couldn't dream of without very noticeable damage. That being said, sometimes when the words failed and the shouting started, you still needed a hammer for the less than delicate work. She was still staring at him, that prissy bitch with the middle-aged woman haircut and her smug little smirking mouth. Cutter couldn't wait to see that smug smile slide off her face when he slapped it off. She would take some time to be ground down beneath the stones of the kindergarten, but she would bow. In the end, they all bowed under, even the most stubborn. Well, some of them held on a little longer than others, but that just made their broken little faces all the more delicious. The little girl's eyes perked up for a second, and Cutter was worried that she had seen something. One look at her snooty folks, though, was enough to tell him that they were eating this up. Oh well, princess, whatever she'd seen, it wouldn't matter once she was on her way to the black site. In the end, the scientists posting as Caltech researchers were successful in obtaining Masha. Not right away, of course. No parent would just sign their child away to a couple of strangers who showed up unannounced. First, they would think about it, running their Google searches and checking into the background of the program. They would find out that the program had a sterling reputation, a long list of scientific minds who were very impressed with their findings. Then they'd call the school and do a little checking and find out that yes, the program was legitimate, and yes, the students would be housed on campus, and yes, they would see them after the first 90 days, and so on and so forth. It would all check out, it would all pass board, and when they called the program a week later, Gladdy would tell them that he was excited to work with Masha, and he would see them in 3 days. Cutter silently celebrated as the little academics stepped out of their motel room to smooth over any of the remaining fears the parents might have. He'd spent a week in a bunker hole with a chatty recruit from out west once, and that had been less irritating than close quarters with Gladdy. Gladdy was a good guy, despite being a washout, but he had this habit of liking to yammer that made Cutter's knuckles itch. Cutter had been careful not to be seen anywhere in town, doing his tomcatting and drinking in the next town over, and he was pretty sure that the little academic just sat in the room all day and came up with inane conversational gambits designed to make Cutter grind his teeth. If Gladdy hadn't been such a good talker, Cutter was pretty sure he'd have dumped him in a ditch somewhere long ago. He came back in, hanging up the cell phone before grinning at the apathetic Cutter. "They'll have her ready by Monday. We can have her back at the site by Tuesday if we drive all night." "Good. Sooner we get back, sooner we can get to work." Gladdy smiled, but there was no real mirth in it. "You do love beating children, don't you?" he said, flopping onto the other bed as he reached for his book. "Sometimes. Reminds me of my work in the war. If you can break someone, you have power over them. I like having power over people. It makes me feel good. Sometimes I forget you're a convert and not a washout like me. Cutter snorted. Not my fault you washouts couldn't hack it. Think it's any better on the other side? It's all I hear you guys talk about, how much better it is in the beyond. Gladdy was quiet for the first time in days, and it made Cutter glance away from the TV. Someone on the TV was using a machine gun to cut down a group of Vietnamese soldiers, and when he looked over to the mousy little man on the bed, he could see that a different sort of war was going on over there. Gladdy was staring at the book like he could see through it, and the look gave Cutter the creeps. Sometimes I can still hear those who graduated calling to me. When I'm on level 3, next to the door to beyond, I can hear them singing to me in a language that I might have learned. It sounds like paradise back there. Sometimes I wish I'd been a little better at this, so I was worthy. He was quiet then, and Cutter turned back to the TV and tried not to let the little creep settle too deep into his brain. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Are you excited for tomorrow, Masha? Her mother asked, tucking her into bed as she got ready for sleep. Yes, Mommy, Masha said, smiling at her without any real excitement. Tomorrow was going to be exciting, but it was going to be scary, too. She knew that the two men, Mr. Cal and Mr. Schuler, would take her to California so she could learn with people like her. She was a little young to be leaving home, but Masha knew that she was different, and things like this were expected. If she wanted to get better, to get smarter, she would have to do things that were scary. She would have to grow up before she was ready. Speaking of being unready, her mother was trying not to cry as she looked down at her in her bed. I'll miss you, she said. You know that, right? Masha nodded, and she did know that. She'd seen it clearly in both her parents that they would miss her, but her parents' minds were complicated, and Masha knew that they wouldn't miss her for long. Oh, they would worry about her. They would hope she was doing well, but they would have their work and have their friends, and eventually it would all just become normal. Her father was already thinking about how he might be able to work longer hours without Masha to cook and care for, and her mother realized how much this would open up her calendar for campus work, especially if she wanted to promote in her department. They weren't bad thoughts, not hurtful thoughts, but they still hurt her a little when she realized that in a way they were looking forward to having more time. Mommy, Masha asked as she settled in for bed. Her mother turned to look at her, and Masha heard something clearer now on the edge of her thoughts. Yes, dear? Would you like to sleep in my bed tonight, like you did when I was younger? Her mother's tears were harder to keep back now, and when she nodded, Masha moved over so she could climb in bed with her. She pulled her daughter close, their bodies warm as they lay together, and Masha found it easier to read her thoughts when they were connected like this. What she felt was an overwhelming sense of warmth, an outpouring of love for this child that she'd been ill-prepared for. Masha knew that neither of her parents had really wanted children, had picked it up here and there since she first started hearing thoughts, but neither were they unhappy to have her. They loved Masha. They liked having a protege that they could point to as proof of their intelligence. For surely if they had made Masha, then their lives must have meaning, right? As Masha settled in, snuggling close to her mother, something tickled at the back of her mind. When they'd been meeting with Mr. Schuler and Mr. Cal, Masha had been trying to read The Bigger Man and hadn't been able to. But Masha didn't think that was right either. He was like a book that could be read differently if you turned the words, and Masha didn't quite trust him. The big one, Mr. Cal, had been harder to read, though. She'd been staring at him, pushing all her concentration at him, and suddenly she had felt like someone had slapped her in the mouth. She'd never been slapped in the mouth. Her parents didn't believe in physical discipline, but she had hit her face before and knew that it hurt. She could still feel the tingle when she thought about it, and it made her uneasy. Had he been thinking about slapping her? Did he often slap children? Masha didn't know, but as she dozed off, she dreamed about something else she had heard inside Mr. Schuler, or Mr. Gladdy, maybe. It was a song in a strange language, and as she listened to it, it sounded like the sweetest lullaby she had ever heard. "Beyond," she whispered, and drifted off, thinking of that siren song. Dex went over the plan again in his head, covering all the angles. He'd be taking his life into his hands when he went to go steal from Gino's, and he knew it. Even with his special talent, he knew things could go south pretty quick. Gino's was a big family-owned grocery store, but most everybody understood that the family in question was the mob. Unlike most of their washing operations, Gino was old blood, and this was as close to retirement as he was likely to get. He didn't like kids, especially not black kids, and Dex was already taking a chance by even trying it. But what he did know was that Gino was going to be busy when he went to go get his bread. You see, Gino was going to be fixing his circuit box when Dex came in, and with Grizz behind the counter, no one would be able to stop him. Dex had planned the whole thing out, he and the Weird Boys. The gang was less of a capital G gang, and more of a protective group for street kids labeled as weird. Some of it was regular stuff. Clubfoot Steve, Bald Mary, Hops. They were kids who, through bad luck or whatever, were a little different. Dex, on the other hand, was even more different. He and Wizard were weird with a capital W, and they knew it. Smoke was weird too, but his was a little less explainable, though infinitely more useful. You see, Smoke could disappear. Not like go invisible, but he seemed to make everything around him more interesting to look at. As long as Smoke stayed absolutely still, he could remain undetectable. They had used it a few times to get away with stuff, but it had proved difficult the last time they hit Gino's. Since he couldn't move, Smoke was stuck until he got an opening. Gino had chased him down the road and swung his bat and yelled some words you probably weren't allowed to say anymore as he ran off. And Smoke had just barely made it out of there with his life. Wizard could make electronics break if he concentrated. He could even fry cars, though it gave him a nosebleed. Then there was Dex. Dex could use the Brain Blast. Brain Blast was what they called it, but it didn't quite do it justice. Dex could concentrate on something, sometimes holding up his hands to his temple like Charles Xavier in the X-Men comics he liked to read, and send out a wave of air or energy or something. He'd used it to knock people over when they chased him, and he even broke some windows once with it, but it always left him kind of drained afterwards. Dex was careful how often he used it, and he was up to 3 times a day before the effort gave him a total migraine. That's why they were called the Weird Boys, and the other gangs knew not to mess with them. Well, some of them did. The plan was going to go down right around sunset, just as the streetlights came on, and Dex wanted to go over it again before the time came. "Come on, man," Wizard said, the rubber ball he was tossing making a hollow chunk sound as it hit the wall. "It ain't rocket surgery. We know what to do." They were sitting in the clubhouse, an old storage container that someone had been careless enough to leave unlocked and stupid enough to leave in downtown Detroit unattended. The kids had grabbed some throwaway furniture and built a home in it, probably the coziest any of them had ever known. Dex had been in 13 foster homes before he finally just took to the streets, and the clubhouse was better than any of them. No one took your money and gave you abuse in return in the clubhouse. "Fine," Dex said, letting his feet slide off the milk crate they'd been sitting on. "Then let's hear it." Wizard blew out an angry breath. "I'm gonna go into the back alley so I can blow the fuse box." Dex looked at Smoke, he and Clubfoot Steve playing spades with Bald Mary, and the boy jumped a little as he noticed him. I'm Lookout. I gotta stand across the street and alert you if anything goes wrong." Dex nodded, satisfied with the plan. "And I'll be inside, stealing our daily bread." Wizard had wanted to use Smoke again for the theft, but Dex didn't think it was a good idea after the last time. Smoke had gotten away, but he'd had nothing to show for his efforts, and the gang had gone hungry that night. What's worse, there was a chance that Gino would recognize him, and that would pooch the whole deal. They needed to be undetected, but they also needed to go unnoticed. After the last time, Smoke had been made lookout, and Dex decided to take matters into his own hands. Reynolds hated these kinds of assignments. He and Drether had been sitting down the street from the packing container the kids lived in for about a week, and not a day went by that he didn't call his boss and ask if he was sure he wanted this one. They had snatched street kids before, and they usually weren't worth the trouble. They were willful, unsociable, and created problems where there didn't need to be any. Cutter would likely have a field day with this one, if Reynolds could get him, that was. "They're planning something," Drether said, putting down the headphones as he picked up his soda cup from the holder. "No shit," Reynolds said. "They're street kids, Dre. They're always planning something." Drethers gave him a look and sucked the last few inches of drink out of his paper cup. They had put the bug in the container 3 days ago. It hadn't been hard. Their little gang was made of children, none of them old enough to shave yet. Dex and Wizard were probably the oldest, the site manager fixing Dex's age around 12, but the others were probably still capable of mixing in with elementary school kids. The site managers wanted Dex and Wizard, Dexter Monroe and William Cranby, but if it came to one or the other, they wanted Cranby more. We think that with some training, he might have more to offer than an electromagnet with attitude. Reynolds hoped so, because he'd been planning a date with his girlfriend this week, and hated to think that she was probably sleeping in someone else's bed because he was chasing a one-trick pony. The phone rang, vibrating in the empty cup holder, and Reynolds picked it up grumpily. "Yeah," he asked, expecting Mike, but getting a shock. "Is that how you answer the phone when I call, Bartholomew?" Reynolds sat up a little straighter. That had been the voice that had haunted his dreams when he'd slept in the beds these kids were preparing to occupy. Reynolds could remember the taste of this man's fingers as they split his lip when he was 7, the crack of thunder as he beat him senseless at 11, and the disappointment when it had all been for naught and Reynolds had washed out. He could still hear him saying how much he regretted wasting those beatings on him, but that maybe there was something he could do to recoup their trouble. "No, sir. Sorry, sir. Agent Reynolds reporting." The voice on the other end said nothing for a count of 5, but Reynolds could hear the smile behind those thin lips at the fear he put into this grown man. "Status?" "The boys are present. Something's going to happen later, and we believe we may be able to isolate them and take them." Drether gave him a look that conveyed his surprise expertly, but Reynolds waved him off. "I should hope so. 7 days is a little much to grab 2 truant boys off the street. They rarely leave the group, sir, and as the site manual dictates—" "Don't dictate site code to me, Bartholomew. I was writing them while you were still pissing the bed, though I seem to recall that wasn't all that long ago." Reynolds blushed and was glad that he hadn't just put the phone on speaker. "Well, sir, if you would like to authorize some extra hands, I'm sure we could get this done without being seen." "I would have thought 2 full-grown men could manage a snatch job on 2 half-grown boys. Abilities be damned. Either grab them and return tonight, or just return tonight and wear your incompetence." He hung up then, and Reynolds sat back as he ground his teeth. "I'm guessing that wasn't Mike," said Drether, earning him a dark look from Reynolds. "Nope. Change of plans. Surveillance is over. When these kids leave, we're following them. One way or another, we're coming home after tonight." Reynolds meant to come back with the boys. He was not about to let Security Chief Ridley make a fool of him. The overhead tone dinged cheerily as Dex walked in, and he heard the old gangster clear his throat as he caught sight of him. Too late to back out now. It was do or die. "Help you find something, boy?" Gino asked, taking a step out from behind the counter. Dex could hear the sound of a broom on tile as he rounded the aisle, and Grizz came into view a few minutes later. Grizz was the antithesis of Gino. His patronage was open for debate, and he was the only white guy Dex had ever seen with a full afro. His skin tone made everyone think he might be mixed race, but what races were mixed there was anyone's guess. Grizz was just shy of 7 feet tall and was built like a linebacker. Supposedly, Grizz was somebody's nephew, and Gino hadn't had a lot of choice in hiring him. Despite his size, Grizz was just about the nicest guy you'd ever meet, and he sometimes gave the out-of-date food he pulled off the shelves to the homeless guys, despite Gino's orders to stop feeding the vags. He smiled when he saw Dex, but the smile curdled when he saw the top of Gino's shiny head coming their way. What remained of Gino's hair was scooped into a little ponytail at the nape of his neck. He was dressed in a butcher's apron, a pair of eldritch jeans gracing his small legs. He looked like someone had taken a full-grown man and set him on a pair of children's legs, and the rumors were that he had some kind of muscular disease that had facilitated his departure from the mob. Whatever was wrong with his legs, it didn't stop his big scarred hands from being very adept at violence. As Dex pretended to peruse the chip selection, one of those big hands found its way onto his shoulder, and he looked up to see Gino leaning down to talk in his ear. "Listen here, I don't care if you got money or not. I'm not about to let you rob me blind while you pretend to..." But he looked up suddenly as the bell chimed again, and straightened up when he saw a pair of men entering the store. He greeted them warmly, telling them to look around and let him know if he could help them. His smile faltered a little when one of them approached the deli counter, and Gino's fingers cut into Dex's shoulder. He eased up a moment later, telling the guy he'd be right there, but not before leaning down to issue another warning. "I'll be watching you, boy. Any funny business, and I'll introduce you to something I should have shown your other little friend when he came in here to steal. Get your shit and get out." "Grizz," he said, "make sure this customer finds the door, all right?" Then he shuffled off on his small legs and told the fella he was sorry for the delay and asked what he could get for him. Grizz swept a little closer, clearly looking uncomfortable. "Sorry, Dex, I don't have anything for you guys tonight. Gino's really busting my balls about giving out food, and I don't think I can help." "It's okay, Grizz. I got money. I can pay for my stuff." Grizz looked relieved, sweeping closer to the counter as Dex loaded up his shopping basket with bread and meat. As he grabbed it, he wondered why the lights hadn't gone out yet. Where was Wizard? Had something happened? What was the holdup? Without much choice, Dex approached the register and laid out his purchases. A loaf of bread, pack of bologna, package of Kraft singles, a bag of chips, package of Mike and Ike's, Dex's favorite. He tried to look cool as Grizz rang it up, but inside his stomach was in knots. Why were the lights still on? Why had Wizard not killed the power? What in the hell was taking so long? "All right then, your total's $17.38, Grizz said, putting the bag down on the counter as he held out his hand. Dex reached into his pocket, contemplating grabbing the bag and making a run for it. And that's when it happened. Suddenly, the store went completely dark, and as the emergency lights came on, Dex grabbed the bag from Grizz and made a run for the front door. Gino yelled in anger, Grizz shouting about how the power had gone out, but Dex didn't realize his problem until he banged against the automatic door. He felt so stupid as he lay there, his purchases spilling out across the tile as his vision swam. No power meant no automatic door. He stood up, grabbing a few things and trying to orient himself. He had to go, he had to move, and as someone grabbed his arm, he twisted away and made a run for the back door. He could see the emergency sign lit up in the gloom, but when someone stepped out between him to block his aisle, Dex knew that he had to get serious. He was about 6 steps from the man when he realized it was Gino. The old pirate grinned at him, brandishing a push broom like a spear as he prepared to bring it down on the fleeing kid. Dex didn't know if he could see his smile as well as Dex could see his, but he hoped he could. Dex had been waiting a long time to do this, and as he closed his eyes, He hoped it would be enough to send the fat old meatball out of his way. He concentrated, pushing that unknown force in his mind out, and when the man went sprawling into a chip display, Dex whooped in joy. He jumped over the splayed legs and hit the door with both hands. The siren never went off. Lack of power and all. And as he came into the alley, he saw Wizard waiting for him. He was shaking his head, but smiled as he saw the little pile of food in his arms. "Nice one! Sorry it took so long. We gotta go," Dex yelled, pulling him along. There would be time later for regaling Wizard with the heist, but now it was time to escape. He could hear the people inside as they tried to get a handle on the situation. And Dex wanted to be far away when they finally got it all sorted out. This could still go south, and he knew that even if they were quick, they might still get caught if they weren't. The sound of Gino Mazur, bellowing in sudden anguish, turned both boys towards the back door. The man was standing in the semi-darkness, his face stuck half in shadow as the light from the chased bulb hit the massive gun in his hand. It looked like a cannon, like something that would blow a hole clean through you, and when he leveled it at them, shouting that hated word that both boys had heard since they were old enough to contemplate that it was an insult, they were powerless to do much but stop and stare like deer in the headlights of a semi-truck. Dex ready to blast, wanting to stop him before he could fire, but it was too far away, and the voice of thunder erupted too soon. Dex closed his eyes, prepared to open them in the hereafter, but was rewarded with nothing besides a sudden hot spray across his cheek. He opened his eyes and assessed himself, finding his body much as it had been before Gino's comically large weapon had gone off. One look at Wizard, however, showed him that he had not been so lucky. The boy's shirt had a hole in it that seemed much too big. The ragged edges were spreading blood across the surface, and Wizard was looking at him as if to beg him to make it stop. As he fell, Dex could see that the hole in his back was even bigger, and when Dex caught him mid-fall, his arms were soon red with the boy's blood. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. No one should be shot in the street over $17.38 worth of groceries. Dex knew he should go, but as Wizard lay there panting his life out, he was helpless to do much more than kneel there and watch his friend die. When someone thumbed the hammer back on that gargantuan firearm, Dex looked up into the inky blackness and marked the end of his life. "Told you, boy," Gino panted, clearly enjoying himself. "Told you I'd introduce you to something that would stop you from stealing from me ever again. Bet the cops give me a medal when they get here. They'll probably thank me for cleaning up the streets." Dex closed his eyes again, preparing to hit the murderous bastard with the biggest brain blast yet. But he never got the chance. He jumped when a shot rang out, but when something clattered to the ground beside him, he opened his eyes and found Gino's gun beside him. He looked up to find the fat old greaseball wobbling on his suddenly unsteady legs. There was an impressive stink in the air as his bowels let go, but that wasn't what caught Dex's eye as he scuttled out of the way of the falling man. He pulled Wizard along with him, and the man missed them by inches as he collapsed onto the filthy ground beside his own garbage cans. Dex had seen the hole where his left eye had been, and one look at Wizard showed him that the boy had only outlived his killer by seconds. He was sitting in an abattoir now, keeping company with the dead. "Shit, Reynolds!" someone yelled, and Dex jumped as he saw the two men from inside the shop coming into the alley. "What the hell did you have to kill him for?" "He was about to off both of them," the man said, taking a handkerchief out of his pocket before wiping down the gun. "Site management was pretty clear that we needed at least one of them." Dex had dropped Wizard and was backpedaling nimbly as he could. This whole thing had gotten out of control, and now he wasn't sure what was happening. Wizard was dead. Gino was dead. These guys were talking about him like he was something they'd been prepared to pick up at the store. Just like groceries. A little shopping before home. That was Dex. The man stooped when he came to Wizard, and put the gun in his hand. "Besides, I didn't shoot him. Kid killed him about a second after he shot him. A botched robbery, thwarted assault. Who cares what they call it?" Dex grunted when his back came up against the big green dumpster that took up half the alleyway. He was trapped. The man sighed as he slid something out of his pocket, this gun much smaller and delicate looking than the one he had put in Wizard's hand. "Well, kid, you're not the one they wanted, but you'll do." Dex had been trying to get himself under control so he could hit these two with a brain blast and escape, but when the little gun barked and a dart suddenly sprouted from his shoulder, he forgot to be afraid as a feeling of warmth washed through him. He was suddenly tired, the adrenaline losing the fight for control as he drifted off. Someone was carrying him. Someone was putting him in the back seat of a car. Someone was climbing in behind him as someone else drove. He could see the blue and white lights dancing by as they passed them, and whoever was in the back with him was securing his arms and putting something over his head. The last thing he remembered before passing out was the man who had shot him talking to someone that he couldn't hear. "We got the other one." "Yeah." "Yes, sir." "No. Williams was a wash. Shot after an attempted robbery." "No, sir. No witnesses. We're heading back. ETA." But Dex passed out at that point and wouldn't know any more for quite some time. By then, he'd already be in the kindergarten. Rebecca had lived in a state of fear for the last 3 weeks, and her parents were getting really worried about it. As she walked through the crowded halls of James Marvin Middle School, bumping into others as she tried to stay in the moment, she suddenly knew that today would be the day that it all happened. Today would be the last day she ever saw her family, said hi to her school friends, and basked in the Ohio sun again. It had all started with dreams. Rebecca had been plagued with dreams since she was young, but they hadn't started to scare her, not until recently. Normally her dreams were about vague things, cars or candy bars or songs on the radio, but Rebecca had noticed that they almost always came true. She'd seen the Nintendo DS that her parents had gotten her for her birthday a few years ago, something that had set her dad off when she didn't act absolutely surprised. She'd seen the surprise algebra quiz that she was going to fail and studied on the bus so she could manage a C. She'd seen the car that was going to hit Lacey Summers, but hadn't been quick enough to stop that one, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. Rebecca saw all kinds of things, but it wasn't until last year in history class that she finally had a name for it. After a unit on Greek mythology, Rebecca had heard the sad story of Cassandra and how her premonitions had been correct, but ignored. After that, she always thought of the dreams as Cassandra dreams, but they weren't just dreams anymore. Rebecca started having them while she was awake about 3 weeks ago, and they scared the hell out of her. She'd been sitting in history class, reading a book as she waited for the bell. It was the end of the day, and she was looking forward to talking with her friends and maybe playing something on her computer. She'd just turned a page, reading over the adventures in Westeros for the 3rd or 4th time, when everything went white. It was like being caught in one of those flash grenades, and as Rebecca fell sideways out of her desk, she heard people calling her name. Suddenly she hadn't been in 7th period history class, but in a cold, dark place she was unfamiliar with. She couldn't move her arms, and when she looked down, she saw they were strapped down with thick bands. She was in a hospital, but it wasn't like any hospital she'd ever seen before. It was so sterile, so cold, and the only light to be seen was a small overhead lamp on the desk. Rebecca lay back, looking at the unfamiliar ceiling, and waiting for what would come next. Suddenly the room was invaded by a blade of light, and the shadow it carried fell across the bed. A man walked in. He was tall, his hair in a tight crew cut, and his fatigue pants made her think he might be a soldier. He stepped right up to the side of her bed, and his fingers had suddenly become needles. They were huge and glistening in the knife's edge of light, and the liquid slid down them in fat drops. As he prepared to plunge them in, He mouthed something that she couldn't hear. When she woke up, she was in the nurse's office, and the space was as different as the one she had left as night was today. "Feeling better, sweetie?" the nurse asked. "You gave us a little scare there." The nurse said she believed Rebecca had experienced a seizure, but her doctors could find no reason for it when her mother rushed her to her pediatrician. Possibly stress-related. I imagine going from elementary to middle school is a big transition. If it happens again, Mom, make sure to bring her back in. Until then, get plenty of rest and maybe cut back on the caffeine some. It had happened 5 more times since then, but Rebecca had kept it to herself. She didn't think she was having a seizure. She thought she was having waking Cassandra dreams. "Becca, are you okay?" Rebecca looked up, trying to force the duality of her vision to coalesce into something normal. She saw Darlene looking at her with real worry. Darlene wouldn't understand this, but Rebecca was glad that someone familiar was there to ground her. First time it had happened had been scary, but after that, Rebecca had managed to get it somewhat under control. She still had to wait for it to pass, closing her eyes and trying not to get dizzy, which would make her throw up, but it got a little easier to handle every time. As her vision finally cleared, the dual perspective settled into the present again. She sighed and leaned against the lockers for a minute before answering. "Fine, Darlene, it's just a little headache." "Becca, you aren't taking drugs, are you?" Rebecca almost laughed, but had to remind herself that Darlene was serious, as well as legitimately worried about her. Darlene and her other friends, Susan and Mary, had been talking about her a lot when they thought she wasn't listening. Never anything bad, but they still discussed her like she wasn't there. They'd noticed how different she'd become in just the last few weeks, and in Darlene's mind, that could only lead back to one of the after-school staples like drugs or alcohol or strangers. "'Cause I saw an after-school special thing at church, and you look like you're going through what the girl was going through when she was on drugs, as, she went through it, and I'm worried about you." It's not drugs," Rebecca assured her, straightening up as she got herself under control. "I've been having these really bad headaches for a while, but I think they're starting to pass." It's not your monthlies, is it?" Darlene asked, pitching her voice low. Darlene always talked about her periods like an old woman, trying not to offend anyone's sensibilities. "Definitely not," Rebecca said. "Do you need to go to the nurse's office?" Darlene asked, but as the second bell rang, Rebecca got a less violent jolt of intuition. "No, but I think I'm going to miss 3rd period." "How come?" Darlene asked, sounding hurt. Math was the only period the girls had together this year, and Rebecca thought it reminded Darlene of the 5 years of classes they'd had in elementary school together. Rebecca was about to say she didn't know, but about that time the tone sounded overhead. "Rebecca Daniels to the principal's office. Again, Rebecca Daniels to the principal's office ASAP," Miss Taylor called over the crunchy static of the ancient speakers. Darlene looked at her mystified. "Spooky," she whispered, and Rebecca couldn't help but laugh at the silly face Darlene always made to go along with it. Despite the stressful few weeks she had experienced, Rebecca could always count on Darlene for a good laugh sometimes. Conrad drummed his fingers on his leg as he sat in the old model sedan across the street from the middle school. He always felt like a creep when he had to take these kinds of jobs, and he expected Chris Hansen to tap on his window at any minute and asked what he thought he was doing. He glanced over at Kyrie, who was scrolling on her phone, and even from here he could see the colorful layout of Instagram. She could sit there for hours on end, just scrolling through different stories, and it amazed Conrad that she never ran out of things to take in. "How do you do that?" he asked, suddenly unable to stand it anymore. Kyrie looked up from her phone and raised one of her artfully done eyebrows questioningly. "Do what?" "Scroll on your phone all day. Isn't it boring? Don't you run out of whatever after a while?" Kyrie shrugged. "I don't know. It's just doom scrolling. Mindless consumption of media. What do you do on your phone? I don't think I've ever even seen it." Conrad reached into his pocket and pulled out a little silver flip phone. "Make calls." Kyrie looked at the little gray box with real amusement. No way! You work for one of the most advanced military organizations on the planet, and you carry that dinosaur around in your pocket? How do you live? Conrad shrugged. Offline, I guess. Just never saw the point of having something like that. All we had overseas were sat phones, and all you can do on them is make calls. Kyrie laughed. After this, we are totally taking you somewhere so you can join the 21st century. Maybe we'll stop at a museum so you can drop off that relic for some antiquities exhibit, too. She went back to her doom scrolling, as she called it, and Conrad sat back as he watched over the front of the school. This was the boring part, the surveillance before the snatch. But it was necessary. If the plan fell through, they might very well have to grab her off the street, and for that, they would need to know her habits. Did she walk? Did she bike? Did she often stop at a friend's house? This was all data that would need to be compiled, but there was another reason they were staying so close. Ridley had made it pretty clear that she wouldn't need to be snatched if everything went to plan. Rebecca Daniels isn't our first future seer. If we can put possible futures in her way, something horrific that could happen, her abilities will pick up on it and warn her of the potential threat. The longer you stay within the proximity of the girl, the more likely her early warning system will focus on this. The more she's warned, the more she'll hyperfixate. The more she hyperfixates, the more manic she'll become. The more manic she becomes, the more her anxiety will look like insanity, and the easier it will be to pluck her up from some facility once she's Baker-acted or institutionalized. There's no need to snatch someone and risk public interference when so many of these facilities are in our pockets already. Conrad liked the old ghoul well enough, but when he started talking like that, it always made Conrad a little worried about his mental stability. It didn't have to be this way, he reflected as he squirmed in his seat to stop the pins and needles that were shooting up his buttocks. Conrad and Kyrie, Representatives Marvin Lancaster and Marcy Chin from Dartmouth College, had sat in the Daniels' living room and had a very similar meeting to the one that Masha's parents had had. Conrad, Marvin, had told them how gifted their daughter was and how they wanted to extend her a place in their program for gifted young people. Her tuition would be covered by the state, and the possibilities after graduation from a program like this would be boundless. The Daniels, however, were not MIT grads. Mrs. Daniels was a sometime substitute teacher and full-time homemaker. Her husband was a mechanic for one of the local outfits, and neither had so much as stepped into a college campus, let alone graduated one. The Daniels were pedigree white trash from the Northeast, and how either had managed to spawn the girl they were now hunting for was beyond him. They had been mistrustful of the pair from the moment they'd opened the door to find them on their doorstep, and had declined their offer without asking their daughter's opinion. Rebecca ain't going to no liberal college so she can come back with a head full of ideas and a lack of godliness. I'd suggest you two leave, her father had groused at them, and Conrad and Kyrie had apologized for wasting their time. They had planned to snatch her that very week, but when Ridley had suggested this alternative, Conrad had been receptive. Now they were sitting here for God knew how long, waiting for this 11-year-old girl to have a nervous breakdown. Conrad sighed as the bell rang, and students hustled to make their class before it stopped. At least the pay was good, he reflected, as he wiped a hand over his camo pants. Rebecca came into the principal's office to find someone unexpected waiting for her. She had been seeing Dr. Hammarskjöld for about a year now, and when she saw the funny little man perched behind the intimidating desk that her principal favored, she couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't the first time he had come to check up on her after a particularly heavy session, and as he pushed out of Principal Vine's chair and came around the desk, Rebecca found that the visions were the farthest thing from her mind. He leaned against the desk, his head just visible over the lip, and he looked for all the world like a shrunken Mr. Rogers. "Miss Daniels, I got a call from your mother this morning to let me know you've had a particularly awful dream last night, so I thought I might come and check on you. So, how are you today?" Rebecca opened her mouth to tell him about the waking dream she'd had only moments before, but quashed it. Dr. Hammarskjöld knew about the Cassandra's dreams, but she hadn't quite dared to tell him about the waking ones. The one last night had been no worse than any other, but it had begun in the midst of a dream that had been pretty good up until then. The switch from her usual nonsensical dreamscape to the harsh sterility of her visions had been extremely jarring, and she'd woken up her parents when she started screaming. She was ashamed now that she realized she had inconvenienced Dr. Hammarskjöld and taken him away from his other patients. It was nothing. It was just... She hesitated, trying to find a lie, but he guessed it. It was the hospital dreams again, wasn't it? Rebecca bit her lip, nodding as she hung her head. Have you identified the man from your dreams? Is he a relative, maybe? Someone from your past, perhaps? He asked, taking a much smaller seat from beside the desk where he'd hidden it. I don't know, but it almost seems like I should know him. How can I not? He haunts my dreams. He's never far from my mind. I feel like every time I see him, I'm a little closer to going crazy. The little man smiled, and that childish grin was enough to put Rebecca at ease. Her parents had been skeptical when a family friend told them about Dr. Hammarskjöld, but he'd proven to be the one respite in Rebecca's often uncertain world. He had been very interested in her dreams, especially the ones that focused on this mystery man, and considered the frequency with which they came true to be more than coincidence. Rebecca wasn't sure that she would have stayed sane this long without him, and he'd been a great help in her recovery. Rebecca, you may have to entertain the idea that this man is simply a manifestation of your own fears. You may never see him in the flesh, and that may be a good thing. I want to schedule an appointment this afternoon with your mother. Would that be okay? I'd like to talk about the frequency of these dreams, and I'd like you to be honest with me this time. I know they've been happening more often than you've been telling me. Rebecca looked away, not wanting to hurt the little doctor's feelings by letting him know that she had lied to him. Yes, sir, I will. His phone vibrated then, and he looked at the message before punching in a response with his stubby fingers. It always looked so weird to see him type on a regular-sized phone, and Rebecca tried not to laugh. Dr. Hammarskjöld was very open about his dwarfism, but Rebecca still tried her best not to make him feel self-conscious. He'd been so wonderful to her, such a help in her time of need, and she didn't want to repay him with insults or belittlement. Now, before you head back to class, I'd like to put you in a peaceful state so that you can focus on the rest of your day and not be distracted by visions. Would that help? Rebecca nodded, holding her hands out to him instinctively. Dr. Hammarskjöld had a thing that he did where he put a patient in a state of peaceful relaxation, and Rebecca always felt better after one of these sessions. Afterwards, her mind was always more focused, less affected by the visions, and she usually slept well the night after one. She had a test coming up last period, and if she could focus enough to pass it, the day might not be a total loss. Okay, he said, taking her hands and closing his eyes. Now I want you to count back from 10 for me. Once you reach 10, we may begin. Rebecca closed her eyes, waiting for the magic to happen. Once you reach 9, you'll enter a relaxed state of mind. His voice took on a dreamy quality as he spoke, and Rebecca felt his thumbs making circles on her palms. Once you reach 8, you'll be feeling great. His voice settled over her like a warm blanket, and Rebecca found that she did feel great. Once you reach 7, you'll be floating in heaven. Her body did feel lighter, less substantial, more at ease. Once you reach 6, there'll be no conflicts. Rebecca yawned, wanting to cover it, but unable. Once you reach 5, your problems take a dive. Rebecca felt like she could drift off to sleep, right here. Once you reach 4, it's time to snore. Rebecca did feel herself nodding off. Once you reach 3, you'll find your reprieve. Rebecca tried not to fall asleep, but it was inevitable. Once you reach 2, it's all up to you. Rebecca lay back a little, her hand slipping out of Dr. Hammarskjöld's. "Once you reach 1, it's over and done." Rebecca was snoring softly in her chair, her peaceful slumber unbroken by thoughts. "Now, Rebecca, you will sleep for the next 10 minutes and awake refreshed and ready for whatever the afternoon may bring." Rebecca nodded sleepily, but it was more of a reflex than anything. She was already dreaming of some place other than the sterile hospital. The silver flip phone rang, and Conrad had barely answered it when Security Chief Ridley shouted for him to go in the school right this very second. "What? Get the girl? It's the middle of the day, sir. We would definitely be—" "No, listen closely, because I don't have time to explain." Conrad listened, understood, took off his seatbelt, and opened the car door. Understood, sir. I won't let you down." "I never had a doubt," he said, hanging up as Conrad snapped the phone closed. "Where are you going?" Kyrie asked, starting to get out too. "Stay in the car. I'll be right back." Kyrie shrugged as she slid over to the driver's seat, her phone back up as she explored the depths of Instagram. She had just found a really cute cat video that she hadn't seen before, and she wasn't about to miss that. Rebecca awoke slowly, her eyelids fluttering as she looked around the room. She'd fallen asleep in the principal's office? Had she had another incident like before? She hoped not. It was always embarrassing to have them happen at school. As the memories of what had happened slowly came back, she heard the sound of someone texting and looked up to see Dr. Hammarskjöld sitting not too far away. He smiled as he noticed she had awoken, putting his phone away as he got up. "I trust you had a nice rest." "I did. Thank you, Doctor. It was just what I needed." "I'm glad I could help. Now let's get you back to class. Can't help with failing grades like I can bad dreams," Dr. Hammarskjöld tittered. The principal looked up as they exited, his large brush mustache twitching as he got up from the reception area. He clearly didn't like being kicked out of his own office, but he took it in stride since Dr. Hammarskjöld had likely explained it was for a good cause. He went to speak with the little doctor, the man thanking him for his kindness. Dr. Hammarskjöld had taken out his cell phone, the principal stepping back into his office, and as Dr. Hammarskjöld began to speak to her mother, Rebecca said that she would see him later, and headed for the door back to school. When the man walked through the door she was about to exit, smiling at her as he directed himself towards the checkout desk, Rebecca felt all the peace dribble out of her. It was him! It was him! It was him! The man looked at her strangely as she began to hyperventilate. Rebecca was backpedaling, falling on her backside as she crab-walked away from the man. She couldn't breathe. Her breath was coming out in big gasps, but it didn't seem to be helping when it came back in. The man was saying something, calling for help or something, but Rebecca couldn't hear him over the pounding in her ears. He was trying to help her, his hands coming out to touch her, and she pulled away violently as she scuttled backwards. The principal was coming out of his office, and Dr. Hammarskjöld was trying to calm him down, but it was impossible. She was drowning on her own breath, and when she fainted, it was almost a mercy. "She's had a bad shock," Dr. Hammarskjöld was telling her parents. "She's been having these strange dreams about a man who's trying to hurt her. I believe that she may have seen something in that man that she saw today that triggered her badly." Rebecca was laying on a hospital bed, her arms secured with scratchy straps. Her parents were in the hallway, her father holding her mother as she wept openly. They blamed themselves, it seemed. She had had a great aunt with schizophrenia, a cousin with autism, and they hadn't even bothered to have her tested for either. They had failed to get their daughter the proper help, aside from bringing her to Dr. Hammarskjöld, and now she was broken. Rebecca had heard it all from the bed, but hadn't said anything. It wouldn't be long now before it all came to pass, and saying anything would just stretch it out longer. "Is she in danger, doctor?" her father asked, looking at the little man with a lot more respect than Rebecca had ever seen. Her father had always silently considered the man a quack, but his insurance had covered the bills, and that had seemed to help. Her father loved her, wouldn't have withheld anything from her if it meant that she could thrive, but he had grown up in an age of psychobabble and bad actors, and mental health looked to him like so much hokum. Now he knew better, though it was too late. I think she might be. She was almost feral before she passed out. You heard her screams on the phone, Mrs. Daniels. I think that it might be best to institutionalize her for a time. Institutionalize? Her mother wailed. No, not my little girl. She needs to be at home with her family. That may not be wise, Mrs. Daniels. We don't know what might set her off, and if she hurts one of you, one of your other children even, it would be unthinkable. Something like that might facilitate the need for more punitive forms of institutionalization as well. Some of those facilities are little better than prisons, and at least if they send her to Mercy Home, I can continue to monitor her progress and be part of her therapy. The doc knows best, Margaret, her father cut in, though more kindly than Rebecca had ever heard him. How long would she be in here for? Hard to say, Dr. Hammarskjöld said. I would say at least 90 days. If she shows improvement, then she might be able to come home after that. Otherwise, he looked at her sadly from the door of her room. Well, let's remain positive. You can visit her as well. Visits from friendly faces will surely help speed along her recovery. They discussed the particulars, but Rebecca knew it would amount to nothing. They would never visit her because after today she wouldn't be here. She'd be gone, spirited away to some strange and terrible fate. She wondered if Dr. Hammarskjöld knew this or not. She hoped not. She really did like the little man. He had been an island of reprieve in the sea of turbulence that her life had become recently, and she had looked forward to her sessions with him a lot. Very good, Dr. Hammarskjöld said, putting the paper her father had hastily signed into his briefcase. I'll make the necessary arrangements to have her transferred to Mercy Home after she's cleared by the hospital. I know this is hard, but you really are doing what's best for your daughter. Her parents came in to say goodbye, kissing her on the cheek and telling her they'd see her soon. Rebecca said nothing, and when her father turned off the lights and closed the door to her room, she realized she was already in the dream room. The small desk lamp cast the sterile hell in nightmare tones, and Rebecca tried not to cry as she lay in the semi-darkness. Crying wouldn't be any good. The man would come whether she wept or not, and nothing was going to change that. She wondered how long she'd have to lay here, and as she replayed the dream again and again, she realized it didn't matter. He would come. That's all that mattered in the end. She kept thinking about what he was saying, trying to read his lips, and by the time she figured it out, the door was open, and the man she'd been waiting for was there. The clock said it was about 30 minutes since her parents had left, but it had felt like a lifetime. Rebecca supposed that it had been. The man in the fatigue pants had a needle in his hand, unlike the one in her dream. In the dream, they had sprouted from his fingers, but now she saw it was nothing but a plain old syringe. The tip still glistened with translucent fluid, but the fearful illusion was mostly broken. As he leaned over to inject the liquid into her arm, she said the words that he had only mouthed in her dream, and it brought him up short. Nighty-night, princess. He stopped the needle inches from her arm and scowled. Nobody likes a wise-ass princess. The needle slid in, and Rebecca plummeted into a thankfully dreamless sleep. She woke up in a much worse nightmare than she had been living. She woke up in the kindergarten to the sound of a little girl crying for her mother. Dr. Nathan Hammarskjöld was leaving the hospital when his phone rang. He looked down at the screen and considered not answering it. It had been a stressful day, and he really did not want to talk to the man who'd exacerbated most of it. He knew, however, that not answering would bring him even more stress, and he picked it up as he stepped into the mop closet so he wouldn't be overheard. Yes? The line was quiet for a moment before the living corpse of his nightmares began to speak. Is that how you speak to me, Nathan, the man who made you everything you are today? Nathan wanted to tell the man exactly how he wanted to speak with him, but he bit his lip and gave the old corpse what he wanted. No, sir. How can I help you? That's better. Just wanted to let you know that your bonus for helping with the extraction will be in your account before the end of the day. Nathan waited for the other shoe to drop, not taking the bait as he waited for the man to tell him why he had really called. "I also wanted to tell you that we'll be calling you back to the kindergarten for this year's class." There it was. "I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm afraid I must decline. I have far too much going on with my practice to—" "Oh, Nathan, you must have misunderstood. I wasn't asking. I wasn't inviting you to come teach a course. I was telling you to waddle your diminutive ass home. Now see here, I'm not one of your puppets that you can yank back to the stage when you feel like it. I am a doctor with a PhD in psychology and a minor in child development. I studied at Johns Hopkins, for Christ's sake, and I will not be bullied by you anymore." There was dead air for the stretch of about 10 seconds, and every second saw a little more air run out of the doctor's sails. "You will come home. You will assist us with this year's cycle, and in return, I will forget that you ever spoke to me in such a way, Nathan. You owe that PhD to this institute, as well as your life. Have you forgotten how I plucked you out of that orphanage? How I saved you from a freak show or as a life as a subject of outrage and ridicule? Have you forgotten how I let you keep your ridiculous little powers when the rest of your class was burnt out and washed out? Every day that you breathe the air without pain is a day that you should fall on your knees and thank God for the existence of your betters, Nathan. I will see you in 3 days, or you'd had better hope I never see you again." He hung up the phone, and Nathan was left shaking in the broom closet. His phone made a satisfying splash as he threw it into the mop bucket, but it was a tantrum that ultimately gained him nothing. Unlike most of the kindergarten washouts, Nathan hated the things they made him do. He'd become a doctor to help people, not to sacrifice children before the altar of this clandestine organization. He hadn't wanted to help with Rebecca Daniels, but Ridley had made it clear that he didn't have much of a choice. It was either Rebecca, or Ridley would expose him for what he was, and Nathan couldn't have that. He seethed in the closet as he fished his phone out of the mop bucket. It appeared that even now he was little more than a fool, meant only to caper for Security Chief Ridley. "Look, Dunston, you know how hard it is to place kids once they get close to 18. You're almost 16, well beyond the age that we can adopt out most kids, and this might be your last shot at a family." Dunston sat across from Mr. Seaver, twirling the blue metal pen between his fingers. It was a nice pen. The metal was smooth between his digits, and the click when he hit the bottom was satisfying. He'd found it on the ground outside the halfway house, the place they sent you when you got too old for the orphanage, and it was little more than a grungy hostel full of sullen youths. It had once belonged to a man who sold insurance, a man who was either named Sam or Stan. Sam or Stan had been killed in the desert outside of El Paso, and his killer had taken the pen with him as a trophy. He'd been spinning it between his fingers, too, when he dropped it out the window, and never came back for it. It was a very interesting pen, a pen with good secrets. Dunston had a lot of things like this in his shoebox in his room. He had a comb from a girl who'd been adopted that showed flashes of a foster home that she'd been in before. He had a marble that had belonged to a man who'd grown up to be a child molester before someone split his skull open with a shovel. He had a business card for an adulterer who cheated on his wife with most of his clients. He had a little china doll that had once... Dunston, are you paying attention to what I'm saying? Yeah, of course, Dunston said. But they both knew that he wasn't really hearing him. Dunston had been diagnosed with ADHD from a young age, but what he really had was a case of too much stuff rattling around in his head. It did that. It rattled around like the change in the ashtray until he wrote it all out and got it out of there. He had a notebook full of stories, about people who had owned the items before him. And sometimes he would just touch something and write a whole novel about them. It really made him anxious having all that up there, but getting it out was like scratching an itch or finally picking off a scab to find new, fresh skin beneath it. Dunston wasn't a perfect candidate for automatic writing, but he was pretty close. "I need you to be serious about this, Dun," said Mr. Seaver. "When I say this could be your last chance, I'm not being hyperbolic. Don't you want to live somewhere other than this hellhole? Surely you don't enjoy living in this place." Dunston shrugged. "What's not to love? Get a warm bed, 3 hot meals, and entertainment whenever I want it." The group home was good for entertainment, that was for sure. Every night someone was fighting, someone was screaming at someone else, or someone was holding their own personal court over whatever was going on in the bunkhouse. Dunston tended to stay out of such things, having his own problems to handle, but it was fun to watch, nonetheless. He watched more than a few people brought before the judge to be sentenced of anything from theft to slander. The dorm was a lot like Lord of the Flies. Once you got past the front door, the kids were in charge of themselves. Surely you'd prefer somewhere quiet, somewhere less crazy. You'll have to leave in a few years when you age out anyway. Why not find a place for yourself where you can get your legs under you? Dunston blew air out of his nose as he watched the businessman get shot in the desert again. It wasn't that he didn't want a place to live or a loving family to care for him, but none of the families that wanted him were interested in any of that. Dunston had been adopted one time when he was 6, and the experience had been so bad that he'd never made a mistake like that again. The family had been nice. The father looked like one of those suit and tie guys you saw in the sitcoms, and the mother had smiled so big as she glided along in her sundress. They had told him about all the fun things they would do, and how they would buy him toys and feed him good food, and Dunston had been so overcome with all the promises that he had forgotten his system. He had agreed to go without a handshake, something he had done since he realized at 5 that the visions he saw from touching things were more than his imagination. They had taken him that day, paperwork signed, money changing hands, and he had climbed into their car without a second glance. Their house had been nice. It had been a big ranch-style home with a front yard and a tree with a tire swing. They had smiled as they let him inside, telling him that this was a new beginning for him. They were all smiles until they made it through the door, and that was when the smiles had turned jagged. The basement they had made him live in had not been so nice. Dunston had been treated like little better than a dog, and they kept him there for 5 months while they cashed his checks. He'd probably still be in that basement if they hadn't gone on vacation and left Dunston alone to wedge a window open. He'd escaped and ran back to the only place he knew, the orphanage. Mr. Seaver had filed a police report, but he knew that they'd never caught the bastards. After that, Dunston began every interview for potential parents with a handshake. Handshakes showed him exactly what he could expect. So far, in the 10 years since that disastrous adoption, he had shaken the hands of 2 pedophiles, a sadist, someone with 3 other adopted kids that intended to make them clean the house and handle the day-to-day operations while they sat around and did nothing, and a pair of super religious folks who would accept nothing less than total submission to their religion and their rules. Dunston couldn't say that any of this was a surprise. He was older, male, and had been in the system since his mother had dropped him off at the fire station when he was born. It was hard to find a home when you weren't cute anymore. "I'll meet them, Mr. S., but I ain't making no promises." Mr. Seaver spread his hands, looking tired in his rumpled suit. "That's all I ask, Dunston." Dunston grabbed his bag, sliding out of the chair as he stood to go. "I've got some algebra to finish up, Mr. S. When are these guys coming to meet me?" "Tomorrow morning," Mr. Seaver said, turning back to the stack of folders on his desk. "Make sure you wear something nice. Make a good first impression." Sure, Dunston said, not really caring what might be clean in his closet. They would turn out to be just like all the rest. They always turned him down in the end. The cell phone in the cup holder of the panel van vibrated, rousing Wheeler mid-snore. Janice was snoring softly in the seat beside him, and as he grabbed the phone, she came awake with a shake and a snort. Wheeler could have clouted her. They had agreed to nap in shifts, and they were still early into her 4-hour shift. "Wheeler here. Go ahead, HQ." "Good to see you're awake, Agent Wheeler," came the voice of Security Chief Radley. Wheeler sat up a little straighter. He hated when the spooky old man did stuff like this. "Yes, sir. Agent Janice and I are just... There's been a change of plans. I want you to return to your hotel for now." "You want us to stop observation on the kid?" "Listen closely and don't speak until I'm done." Wheeler blinked owlishly as the old corpse laid out the plan. It was solid, a good plan, and when Wheeler hung the phone up, he turned the van on as he pulled out of the parking lot. They had been sitting in the parking lot of the for-rent space that still smelled of pizza for about 8 days straight, just waiting for the right moment to take this kid. It appeared, though, that they wouldn't need it. Janice snorted awake as they left, looking at Wheeler as he dumped the phone back into the cup holder. "Was that the boss?" Janice asked, opening the fold-out mirror so she could fix her hair. "Yup. Did you bring anything you could wear to church?" Wheeler asked. Janice scrunched her face. "Not really. Jeans and casual tops, mostly." Wheeler nodded. "That's what I was afraid of." He took a right suddenly, the car that had been preparing to turn blaring its horn at them, and headed into the city center. "What are you doing?" Janice asked, smiling despite having nearly taken a front bumper in the passenger door. "We gotta head to the mall. Sounds like we might need some clothes before tomorrow." "Yeah, you can't handle nothing like this." "Think so? Bring it on." The two boys looked strange in the glow of the TV, their faces leaning in close as their fighters wheeled about the arena. The click and clack of the controller was constant, the two turning and twisting as they pummeled the other with a combination of kicks and punches. On the screen, a young girl with a sword and a shield did battle with a hulking armored figure with a huge sword. The girl was quick, but not quick enough to avoid the slashes of the armored behemoth. She twisted and turned, raining blows on the swordsman, but when he hit her vertically and threw her out of the ring, the angry sound of plastic hitting the floor was followed by a loud cry of rage. "Damn it, Ham! I almost had you that time!" Darius yelled. Hamilton sat back, the boy nearly as large as the hulking swordsman on the screen. "Not a chance, Darius. I had you right where I wanted you from the very start." Dunston watched it all with detached amusement, the fight between these two something of a daily occurrence. Hamilton was a long-timer, like Dunston, and Darius had been here for about 6 years. They had fallen in together because they were all at that age where they would have to pack their crap and seek other prospects soon, and Dunston could think of worse roommates than these two. That was something that was still 2 years away, though, providing none of them got adopted before then. Adoption seemed like a pipe dream to these kids, a dream that was often unfulfilled. "Darius," came a voice from the corridor, and all three of them looked up to see Mary looking into the TV room. "You break that controller, and you owe the house a new one." Yeah, Darius said, turning back to the game before noticing that Hamilton hadn't started playing again. One look back at Mary was enough to let him know that she didn't like being yeah-yahed. "Yes, ma'am. Sorry, Mary." Mary gave him another 5 seconds of ice before moving on. "She thinks just because she's 18 she can boss us around," Darius said, setting the controller on the TV stand. "Nah," Hamilton corrected. "She bosses us around because she knows we'll let her." Dunston nodded, the chips making crunching sounds as he chewed. Mary wasn't just an old-timer like Dunston and Ham. Mary had been born here. Her mother had been living here when she gave birth to Mary, and when she left suddenly a few days afterward, Mary had gone into the system. She'd been running these halls for years, well before she should have, and when she left at the end of the school year, it would truly be the end of an era. There would be a new judge holding court this time next year, and Mary would find out what it was like to catch some ice from people who were bigger than her. Dunston just hoped that Jack wouldn't be the one to take her place. Mary was cruel, but she was always fair. Jack was just a sadist, an egomaniac who wanted power just to have it. Suddenly, adoption wasn't looking so bad. "You want up next?" Darius asked. Dunston nodded, but hesitated as he reached for the controller. The blue one wasn't something he wanted to touch. He'd only lost at Soul Calibur a few times, and every time it was because he had to use the blue controller. The blue controller had come from a thrift store, and the previous owner had left more than Cheeto dust on the thumb pads. He had smacked his kid brother over a game one night, the kid barely old enough for middle school, and he must have liked it because he went right on smacking him till the kid was dead. It was hard to concentrate on something when you could see that kind of brutality slithering through your skull, and Dunston had gone and dropped $15 at the vintage game kiosk the very next day to get his own controller. New stuff didn't have things like that attached to it. "Not with that one," Dunston said, reaching towards Hamilton. "Gimme." "Come on, man," Ham winced. "You always get the new one." "I paid for it, man. Buy your own, and you can say who uses it." Hamilton blew out an exasperated breath, but handed it over as he swapped controllers. The rubber grips felt smooth under his thumbs, the buttons still possessing some click as he settled in for a game. Hamilton took the seat next to him, continuing his play as the beefy warrior. Dunston chose a busty woman with a whip made of chains, and as the game began, Hamilton effortlessly maneuvered him around the ring. "So, heard you might be getting out tomorrow," he said, swiping at the woman in the skimpy costume. Dunston was unfazed and easily stepped out of the way of the massive sword as it came within inches of his character. "Yeah, maybe." Dunston's character rolled out of the way of another swing. "You gonna go?" Dunston narrowly missed another one, dealing a few glancing blows before moving away again. "Maybe. Depends on how big their pool is." As he ducked another sideswipe, Dunston went to work. The long whip encircled the burly fighter and slashed him again and again. As he staggered, Dunston cut him to ribbons as he fell in bloody scraps on the ground. As the busty woman jiggled and posed in victory, Hamilton cursed under his breath and threw his hands up. "Should have known better than to square up with the champ. For real, though, you gonna go with him or what?" Dunston thought about it as he watched the skimpy fighter twirl and cheer. He didn't know if it had come to that, but even if it did, would he really leave behind the only home he'd known for the last 6 years? Dunston wasn't even sure he could. Not really, but it was nice to think that maybe there might be more out there for him than this. "I don't know," he finally said. How could he explain these things to guys like Darius and Hamilton? Hamilton had never even had an offer for adoption. Darius had been fostered twice and dropped off by both families a month later. Neither of them had been considered for 2 years. It had been about 2 years since Dunston had any interest either, and Mr. S was right when he said that this could be his last chance. If he didn't get into a family now, he would have to consign himself to either being alone or building his own. "Well," Hamilton said, throwing an arm around him as he gave him a little hug, "I'll miss you, man. It'll be quiet around here without you." Dunston smiled, but shrugged out of the awkward hug. "Come on, man. I'm not gone yet. Who's to say I'll go anyway? Maybe they'll be weirdos or something." "Shit, we know you just hate that," Hamilton said, casting a nervous glance to the hallway outside the TV room. Mary liked to lurk sometimes, and cussing was likely to earn you a smack upside the head. Dunston laughed, picking up the controller and asking Darius if he wanted a crack at the champ. An hour and several undefeated matches later, Delilah and Grace wandered in and asked if they could watch cartoons on the TV. Hamilton and Darius were getting tired of losing by that point and surrendered the old fuzzy set along with the sagging couch to the girls. The couch looked like something you'd find in an old person's house, but the kids in the system didn't usually get nice things. The couch, the TV, the PS2, it was all from Goodwill, just like the clothes they wore. The city had been cutting budgets, as Mr. S liked to say, and belts were tightening all around. Any tighter around here, Dunston thought, and they'd have to tuck their pants into their rib cages. "Want to go shoot some hoops?" Darius asked. "Sounds like a plan," Hamilton said, but Dunston shook his head. "Nah, I got homework I need to finish. I better get that algebra done just in case I have to turn it in tomorrow." Hamilton offered him a fist bump. Darius following suit, and Dunston obliged before saying he'd see them later. Dunston walked down the dirty corridor of the group home and found the room he shared with Hamilton and Cage and some other kid whose name he hadn't bothered to remember yet. Dunston called him Chip, something the new kid hated, but Dunston told him that when he was here longer than 6 months he might bother to remember his name. The kid always looked hurt when he said it, but Dunston had been here long enough to know that there were two kinds of kids in the group home, short-timers and long-timers. Unless, like Mary kept threatening to do, you went into social work after you aged out and came to work here. Dunston supposed that would make her a lifer. He sat on the bottom bunk and pulled out his algebra book. He got some swirls from the former owner, kids sitting in desks similar to the ones that he took up residence in 6 hours a day, but the book had passed too many hands to really get a good impression. It hadn't been loved, hadn't been hated, and no one had killed anyone with it so far as he could imagine, so it was little more than background static. A minus 6 times parentheses 5 plus 7 equals 40. Solve for A. Dunston hated problems like this. Why did math have to have letters in it? Letters were for books and words, and numbers were for math. That was how it had always been, right up until last year. Now every math problem looked like a damn novel, and Dunston hated it. He worked his way through the steps, the problem turning out to be not that hard, but the next one took him some time, with its multivariable answer. He heard them call for dinner, but Dunston wasn't really feeling hungry. Despite trying to play it cool, he was nervous about tomorrow. With any luck, he would turn them down and be at school before second period. With any luck, he thought, he'd be packed and heading to their place before Darius and Hamilton got out of school. Dunston hated goodbyes more than he hated algebra, and that was saying something. "Hey, Dun, you're gonna miss chow." Dunston looked up to see Mary looking in on him, her face less severe than it had been earlier. Mary was strict, but she was a good person, and Dunston would be a little sad to see her go when she aged out. He'd be lying if he said he didn't have a little crush on her for a while now. Most of the boys in the house did, but mostly he would miss her motherliness. He had read Peter Pan for a book report once, the classics about all the house library had to offer, and he always equated Mary with Wendy somehow. Mary was the mother to the lost boys that lived here. Mary was the mother, wife, sister, and the disciplinarian to the kids at the group home. And without her, who knew how this place would run? "I'm okay. I got some homework I need to finish before I turn in." He thought she would leave him then, but he could feel her staring at him as he tried to get back to his work. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" she finally asked. Dunston started to feed her the same line he'd given to Hamilton, but found that he couldn't. He could play it cool with his friends, but not with Mary. "A little." "Want to talk about it?" she asked, coming to sit on the bed beside him. He could smell her perfume as she came into his space, and he tried not to be creepy. "I don't know if I want to be adopted anymore." Mary laughed. "Then, sugar, you're in the wrong place." I know, Dunston said. "Everyone wants to be adopted, but..." He tried to put it into words, but kept coming up with nothing. "You're afraid that they'll just hurt you again, like the family did when you were young," Mary said. "I'm afraid that being hurt is what I deserve at this point for getting my hopes up," Dunston said, and the tears that came sliding out were far from showy. He was suddenly enveloped by her, Mary pulling him against her as the two embraced. She smelled like fruit, like spice, and her hair was soft when it touched his cheek. He thought she might be crying too, just a little, and when she pulled back to look him in the eye, Dunston felt a warm pang for the woman he had never known, a woman who hadn't wanted him, but still thought enough to leave him somewhere that he'd be taken care of. "Dunston, you're a fine young man, and you deserve to be loved. I can't promise that this family's going to be the end of your search, but do me a favor and give them a chance. I know how hard it is to wonder if you're worthy of love, worthy of a family. We all deserve that chance, though. Some of us just aren't lucky enough to get it." She slid back a little, wiping her eyes as Dunston tried not to notice. He wanted to pull her back to him. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to assure her that she was worthy of love too, but He couldn't bring himself to do any of those things. He was just as confused and scared and sad as she was, and by letting him see the vulnerable girl that lay within her, Dunston was unsure of what to do in the face of her vulnerability. In the end, they sat there for a few seconds in silence before she got up and smoothed the blanket out where she had creased it. "I've got to go make sure the older kids don't hog all the dinner. I'll bring you some a little later if you like." She left then, leaving Dunston with the smell of her perfume and a warm feeling in his chest that wouldn't leave for several hours. Tomorrow was indeed going to be an interesting day. "Ugh, I think I'd rather just snatch this kid on the way to school," Wheeler groaned as he tried to tie the infernal tie that they had given him. Janice snorted as she helped him, getting it right on the first try as she made it look natural. As she moved away, Wheeler saw that she was wearing a plum-colored dress that showed off just enough curve to be cute, but not enough cleavage to be inappropriate. It was a picnic dress, a church social dress, something that showed off just enough for a taste, but not enough for a good snack. It didn't stop Wheeler from wanting another taste, though. "Dress looks good," he commented, loosening his tie so he could stage it for tomorrow morning. "But it'd look better on your floor, huh, big boy?" He turned to find that she had slid out of it, revealing nothing beneath but bare flesh. His own clothes were folded over the sink a moment later, the two making use of the hotel bed for more than sleeping. An hour after that, they were lying side by side in the double bed, staring at the ceiling as the TV played something inane. "I guess the dress was to your liking then," she teased, rolling over to cuddle against him. "I was more interested in the person wearing it," Wheeler said, kissing the top of her head. The two were quiet for a minute, Wheeler wanting a cigarette more than life itself. He always liked to smoke after he'd finished. There was something about having that nicotine high while you were still cresting in the afterglow that really did it for him. It was the perfect cap-off, and if they had been in his house in Brewster, he'd have gone out on the balcony, as naked as the day he was born to have one. The closest neighbor would have to report him for indecency through a telescope, and that was just the way that Wheeler liked it. "Better hope you didn't leave more than memories behind," she joked. "We could get in a lot of trouble if you did." Wheeler sighed. She would have to bring up something like that. "It's what I love about you, Janny. You really know how to bring me back to reality." "I was just saying, you know how the site feels about washouts hooking up. Like these kids aren't screwing like rabbits half the time while they're at the site anyway," Wheeler scoffed, rolling out of bed, out of her suddenly cloying embrace as he looked for his jeans. "That's different," she said, sitting up on one elbow as the comforter helped her retain her modesty. "Those kids are probably going to graduate. Washouts don't get the pleasure of going to the next level." He found them, telling her he was going to smoke. What she said next stopped him in his tracks, though. "I was pregnant once. Did you know that?" He had stopped about 3 easy steps from the door, and he really wanted to walk out of it and smoke on the walkway. Anything would be better than this conversation, but his curiosity was piqued. "Nah, I didn't. It was after I washed out. I was in college for a while, but I came back to the site after washing out of that, too. Just wasn't a good fit for civilian life, I guess." Wheeler could relate. He'd spent 4 years in the Army, but all 4 had felt like a lie. He had risen in the ranks, going as high as corporal, and when they offered to make him a sergeant, he had told them that he was ready to end his career. He'd spent 4 years living with imposter syndrome, and when Ridley had called him to see if he was ready to come home, it was like hearing the voice of God. He hated the old man, but Ridley, the site, the other washouts, they were all comfortable to him. He had never felt more complete than when Security Chief Ridley welcomed him back. "I'm guessing Ridley took the kid, huh?" "Nope," she said, sitting up fully now as she pulled her legs to her chest. "I put him in the system. I wonder sometimes what happened to him. I wonder if I'll ever see him again. I'd like to. Sometimes I wonder how he is, or if he's like me. I guess I probably never will, though." She started to cry then, and Wheeler did leave. By the time he had left 3 butts out on the concrete of the parking lot, he returned to find her fast asleep. That was good. He wouldn't turn her in, not for a lapse of judgment that was likely over a decade ago. As he settled into the bed next to Janice, he reflected that he could see himself being happy with her. Janice, a brat or two, a 2-car garage, vacations, PTO meetings, the whole thing. They could be happy together. They could make it work. Who would watch the kids, though, while they were out snatching? Good old Grandpa Ridley and his ghoulish little kindergarten, probably. Wheeler put it out of his mind as he tried to get some sleep. He needed to be on his toes for tomorrow. Tomorrow, they'd be going home, one way or another. Dunston fidgeted as he sat in the hard plastic chair in the waiting room. He had put on a slightly wrinkled button-up with some of his nicer jeans, but his scuffed sneakers were the only shoes he owned. There was a couple in there now with Patty, and it didn't sound like it was going well. Patty had a shrill voice, something that Dunston had heard many times from down the hall as she suffered from night terrors. And the same scared voice was on display now. Whoever the couple was, they were trying to assure her that they had a very nice home, a lovely room for her, a great school that she could attend, but it was getting them nowhere. Patty sounded like she was having hysterics, and Mr. S was having trouble keeping her from psyching out. Dunston kept looking over at the plastic chairs on the other side of the room, wishing someone would arrive to fill them. The room was set up so the kids could sit on one side and the prospective parents on the other. This meant they could talk if they wanted, but there was enough space to make the kids feel safe as well. It was a good system, but it was a little detrimental when no one had showed up and you were sitting here alone. Dunston kept hoping that they were just late, but had begun to wonder if they were going to show up at all. He figured they had bailed, and now he was just wasting his time here. Patty came out a moment later, running for the back of the house while Mr. S apologized and went after her. The couple came out, the woman looking nervous and the man merely put out. They looked at Dunston, the man nodding, and both began talking softly about whether they should stay or not. It was pretty clear now that Patty wasn't going home with them, and the man sounded like he wanted to go make a phone call. The woman dithered for a moment as he left, finally deciding to go after him. That was when it happened. The back of her shoe snapped like a twig, and she stumbled as she spilled her papers across the tile floor. She cussed quietly as she bent down to get them, and Dunston had gone to his knees to help her before he could think better of it. "Let me help you with that," he said, putting on his best talking to grown-ups voice as he scooped up the forms. "I'm so clumsy. I'd lose my head if it wasn't—" When her hand touched his briefly, Dunston got a shock of something that was stronger than anything he'd ever seen. Someone was dropping off a baby at the fire station. The baby was sleeping, but he wiggled as she set him on the coarse steps. The blanket he was in was blue, a thick one, so she could hide his face from the sun. He started to cry as she left, and she looked back only once before running off in a hurry. When Dunston stopped shaking, the woman was holding him, asking if he was okay. "Mom," Dunston breathed, looking at her with odd certainty. "Mom! Mom! Mom!" The woman seemed confused, her face hopeful, but her mind rebelling against the idea. "No, I'm not your mother. I don't even... You dropped me off on the fire station steps. You wrapped me in a blanket, a blue one. The brand was Dunston Wildmore. That's what they put on my papers. That's why they call me Dunston. You put me there so I'd be safe. You put me there so someone would find me. You put me there so someone else wouldn't find me. You tried to forget where you left me so that they couldn't find me." Dunston felt like his head was full of bees. He'd never had a seizure before, but as he bucked and shook, he saw the woman's face going pale. She was hyperventilating, trying to stop herself from choking, and as the man came back in, she mouthed something to him, and he seemed confused. "Him? We can't take him. He's not on the order. "We're taking him. He's the only one they'll want," she said, scooping up Dunston into her arms. "The Kitchery girl is the man started, but just before Dunston passed out, he heard the woman say something that didn't make a lot of sense at the time. "He has my gift, Wheeler. They'll want him." Everything went black as they hurried him out of the parking lot. Dunston would wake up in a new bed with a new group of kids around him, in a place that was more like the basement he'd escaped from than the home he'd been hoping to find. Wheeler was furious as they drove away from the halfway house. "What were you thinking? What in God's name were you thinking?" Janice was sitting in the back seat, stroking the boy's hair as she watched him sleep. He'd passed out after his little fit, but she had a syringe ready for when he came around. Janice wanted to talk to him, to ask him about his life, but she knew that would be dangerous. He clearly had her ability, the seeing from objects that she had experienced as a girl, and if it was as strong as hers had been, the sight would benefit from it. The Kitchery girl had been a dream seer, and they were a dime a dozen. An automatic writer, however, was something they didn't have right now. "He's my son," she said, feeling certain of it as they drove away, "and he's coming home now." He had been right, though she had been a fool to try it. She had tried to hide him from the black site 16 years ago, but now she knew better. She had been young and impetuous. She supposed that hadn't changed, but she'd seen the site as a boogeyman that would eat her son up. Now she was smarter. Now she knew better. The site would help him. Ridley would help him. He would grow up to be a fine agent, just like her. Either that or he would graduate and know joys that she could never. "I've got to call this in," Wheeler said, picking up the phone as he sped up the road. "They're going to kill us both. We royally screwed up here, Janny." As he talked on the phone to Ridley, Jan knew that wasn't the case. Ridley would be mad, furious probably, but he would accept Dunston. Janice knew that he had the spark. She knew it as surely as she knew that he was as powerful as she had been. She knew because when they had touched, as she touched his hair now in fact, she could see his life playing out like a movie, just for her. She hadn't seen these things in nearly 20 years, not since she had washed out. He had sparked something in her that had been gone, and she knew that the site would accept him. It seemed that Dunston would be starting kindergarten, right along with the others in the new class. Gerald crouched low as he prepared to make a break for it. He watched the two forms as they stumbled about the 3-bedroom trailer, their movements angry and jerky. They were drunk again. They were drunk every night, and Gerald could see that if they caught him, there were several scenarios that would cause this to be his last escape attempt. He saw 4 potential paths before him, but only 2 were routes that wouldn't lead to his death. The 2 paths were black strings, paths that would lead to a bottle upside his head or an accidental shooting. The third was a red string, danger, but a chance for escape. The fourth was a blue string, the familiar blue string that led to his future. Gerald tensed as he crouched between 2 bushes in his side yard, the backpack held tight against him as he watched that blue string. It was going over the side yard fence, out towards the road, and if he could get out of the yard and on the path, he'd be home free. He'd thought as much before, but he had a good feeling about tonight, and he thought this might be the successful run that got him out of his abusive little family situation. He had taken his first step, his trainers peeking from the bush, when he stopped dead in his tracks. The blue string was suddenly twinged with orange, and as he watched, the orange became red as the fibers filled in the blue. Crap. That meant danger. The back door was flung open suddenly, and his father stumbled out of their trailer and looked at the yard from the back porch. "Gerald! Where the hell are you, boy? I know you're out here, Gerald. You better get your ass back over here right now." Gerald was still as a statue. Had they checked his bed already? They couldn't have found the trap door that he made in the corner of the closet, or they'd be a lot madder than they already were. Clearly his dummy hadn't fooled them, and now he had been discovered. They didn't know where he was, but they suspected that he was close, and they meant to find him before he could escape. He looked back at the blue string, and sure enough, it had gone from blue to red, and was now slowly becoming black to match the other three. If he went forward with this plan, he would surely die. The only way open to him was back the way he had come, the cord still a pulsating red, back into danger. But danger beat death every time. His dad was going back inside, and Gerald had made his move as the door closed. The trailer skirting came up easily, the victim of so many other botched escape attempts, and he was under the trailer and heading for his room with practiced ease. He peeked through the hole that he had made, the rug he had laid over it bulging as he checked his room, and found it to be empty. He left his backpack under the house and came up into his bedroom just as he heard his dad's heavy footsteps in the hallway. Gerald gritted his teeth. The old man was faster than he expected, and as Gerald made his slow way towards the bed, he was certain that his father would throw the door open and freeze him like a bug in the hallway light. He was nearly there, 3 easy steps, when he heard the clatter of the knob as his dad's meaty paw gripped it roughly. "Better be in that bed, you little shit!" Gerald tensed, seeing the black string that was forming between himself and the door, and knowing this beating would be his last. "Leave him alone, you brute," came a slurry voice from the living room. "He's probably just asleep. Let him sleep before you wake up the whole damn trailer park yelling like that." The doorknob stilled, and Gerald didn't look the gift horse in the mouth. He'd slid beneath the covers as his father's angry steps went up the hall, yelling at his mother to shut the hell up, and how he would discipline his boy any way he saw fit, and how... But Gerald shut his eyes as he shut out the yelling and shrieking, the sound of flesh on flesh as his dad slapped her or beat her or any number of other things. Gerald closed his eyes and scrunched down beneath the covers, praying it would all just end and he could fall into the mattress and be nothing but an afterthought. His dad didn't come back that night, and Gerald drifted off to the thought that at least he could try again tomorrow. The joy that thought brought him was not something that should bring solace to a 10-year-old, but Gerald wasn't a normal boy, after all. Gerald could see the strings, and the strings helped him stay one step ahead of his dad, his mom, and anyone else who might want to hurt him. Gerald had been able to see the strings for as long as he could remember. They were different colors, and he figured out pretty quick what they meant. Red was danger, orange was caution, yellow meant someone would likely be his friend, pink meant someone loved him, green meant he was being led towards money or other things, black meant certain death, and he had only just realized it in time the first time. Then there was blue. Blue was like the guiding marks in video games. Blue led him towards his destiny. At least, that's what he believed. Whenever a blue string led him to a person, they were always an important part of his life. It had led him to Kevin, his best friend. It had led him to Mr. Turner, the teacher who had gotten him through the 2nd grade and had helped him right up until his dad took him out of school. It led him to Lou, the janitor who had protected him from Hank, his bully. It had led him to Mrs. Castleberry, the teacher who had tried to help him escape his abusive father, right up until they had removed him from school. The blue string helped him grow closer to his goal, and Gerald was curious where it would lead him next. away from this crumbling meth trailer, he hoped. It hadn't always been this bad, of course. When his dad had been working at the disposal plant, he'd been a nice, normal guy. He worked from 6 till 2 every day, had weekends off, and he'd been using a little bit of the meth to keep up with the younger guys at work. He had it under control, and his drinking wasn't so bad. He got a little drunk sometimes, but Gerald remembered his dad as a happy drunk who was the life of the party at cookouts and family gatherings. His mom had always been the rock at home, keeping everything together so that Gerald had a nice, soft place to land when he came home from school. They were living in a rental trailer owned by a guy who sold his dad drugs. That was true, but they were saving up for a house outside the trailer court, and soon, his dad had promised, they would have a nice new house with a big backyard and some things to play on, and maybe even a puppy. Those days made Gerald smile when he remembered them, until he remembered that they had been a lie. Well, not a lie. Not really. More like a dream that remained unrealized, and likely would never be. It all started when his dad got hurt at work. "Please, Milton, I'm sorry." His mother's cries of pain woke him up, and Gerald realized he had only dozed off for a few minutes. He could hear the sound of his father's hand as he took his poor wife to task, slapping her again and again as she cried out pitifully. He was slurring something at her, his speech unintelligible between the drugs and the booze. She was gibbering wetly, and Gerald thought that he might be about to kill her like he intended to kill Gerald. "There, now look what you made me do. You think I like hitting you? Do you? Do you?" Whether he did or not, he hit her again for good measure, and then all was quiet beyond the low sobbing of his mother. She'd been part of the reason he hadn't left yet. Part, but not all. There was a naive part of Gerald that hoped that maybe things could turn around. Maybe they could be that happy family again. Maybe things could go back to what they were, and they could leave this depressing little place and return to the daydream of their brick house with the backyard and the puppy. It was a good dream, but it was never going to happen. It had all started with a bad fall. It had been raining when Dad fell. The rain had made the step where he put his foot slippery. The truck he had been riding on the back of had taken a bump a little too hard. His dad had been tired from lugging cans in the rain all day, and his grip hadn't been as good as it could be. Regardless of the reason, his father had slipped off the back of the truck and hurt his back. It hadn't been a bad injury. His father had healed up in a matter of weeks. The problem was that they had drug tested him, and when they found drugs in his system, they fired him. They assumed the drugs were the reason that he had fallen off the truck. They assumed that he had been wired on meth and gotten hurt. They assumed he wasn't being careful, and they let him go. They made a lot of assumptions, but all of them led to his dad being fired. That had led to his landlord making him an offer. When he couldn't pay the rent, his landlord offered to let him sell drugs in the trailer park. After he'd healed from his injury, he offered to teach him how to cook. His father cooked the product that he sold for his landlord, and by the time Gerald entered the 4th grade, his dad was hooked on a variety of substances. These drugs mixed well with his alcohol abuse, which was less of a fun party trick and more of a problem at home now. His mother was drinking as well, needing to cope with the prospects of living with Gerald's dad, and Gerald felt like he was the only sane person at home sometimes. 4th grade was the only year his dad started really hurting him. His dad had hurt him before. The more drugs he used and alcohol he drank, the angrier he seemed to become, but he was always careful about how he did it up until that point. Gone was the happy guy who used to toss the ball around with him or play Mario Kart on the old Super Nintendo in the living room. Gerald's dad was prone to fits of rage and sudden bouts of unexplainable anger, and it was usually targeted at Gerald, or his mom. His mother tried to shield him from it more than once, but Gerald often found himself wearing long sleeves well into the hot months and pants year-round. So far, no one had seen the bruises or the burn marks or the casual clues of childhood trauma, but that would change one afternoon as he came home a little later than usual. It wasn't Gerald's fault he had been late. The bus had been running behind schedule, and Gerald had gotten home at 3:50 instead of 3:30. His dad had been waiting for him in the living room, and Gerald knew from the moment he saw him that he had been mad. He was sitting in his easy chair, his bloodshot eyes trained on the door, and when he called Gerald to him, his fingers had been digging furrows in the leather. "Where have you been?" his father growled, and Gerald could smell his rancid breath on his face. "The bus was late, Dad. The next thing he knew, he was lying on the floor, and his face felt like someone had hit it with a bat. "Don't you lie to me. I know you were out getting up to no good. Don't you dare lie to me. Don't you ever lie to me, boy. But then his mother had come running in, screaming bloody murder, as she saw what he had done. "Milton, for God's sake, you punched him in the face!" That explained a lot to Gerald at that moment. As his mother cradled his head, his father looking angry and worried as he glowered over him, Gerald felt like one of those computers that's been trying to load something, but just can't find it. In this case, the something was his ability to breathe and speak. He was struggling to figure out what had happened to him, and thankfully, his mom was content to repeat it a half a dozen times so his brain could catch up. His dad had socked him one. He had punched his ticket. He had clocked him and bent his gears. Gerald felt his world spinning drunkenly, and when he'd passed out, it had been a mercy. As he lay here now, listening to his mother sniffle from the living room and the TV blare out a western or a war movie, Gerald wished for oblivion now too. He wished, but apparently whatever force grants wishes for little kids in desperate situations had the night off, and he was left to shudder in his fear and cowardice a while longer. Sometimes I think Ridley really has lost his mind. Agent Tanner was cruising through the trailer park, his lights off and his speed low. This was not the place you wanted to cruise this time of night, and he knew it. Anyone looking out the windows at 3 a.m. would assume that he was looking for some place to buy drugs, and who could blame them? He was rolling along in a Chomo Special, a white panel van with no windows in the back, and the whole thing just screamed kidnap job. He would have rather posted up outside the court, pretending to be broken down, but Ridley had been very clear on what he wanted them to do. "You'll know the kid when you find him, or more likely he'll find you. I have a sneaking suspicion that the kid we're looking for will be just as ready to leave his situation as you will be to help him." "Shh," Danver hissed, looking fretfully. "He'll hear you." Tanner scoffed. "His ears are pretty big, but I don't think he can hear me 7 states away. And so what if he does? It's no secret we all think he's a nut." I don't," Agent Merrill Danvers said quickly. "I think he's a genius, and we should all thank him for the hard work that he does." Tanner rolled his eyes as he took a curve at 5 miles an hour and passed down another long line of identical trailers. A snatch of song occurred to him, something his mother had sung when he was very young, in a place as different as this from night and day. He didn't remember much about that time, a time before being taken to the kindergarten, but the things he remembered often came back in short bursts when he least expected them. Case in point, he remembered vividly the whir of his little dump truck on the thick carpet of his house, and the click, click, click of his mother's sewing needles as she sang a song that encapsulated this place so well. "Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same. There's a blue one, and a green one, and a pink one, and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky, and they—" "Did you say something?" Agent Danvers said, and Tanner shook himself as he made another left turn. Nothing, he whispered, looking at the houses as he rolled past. All of them looking much the same. So, how do we know when we've found the right spot? Danvers shrugged. We don't, I guess. Just keep driving till we find him. We know he's here somewhere, so we just... As the big double-wide came into view near the rear of the trailer court, Agent Tanner suddenly had a very new intuition that had nothing to do with the houses or ticky-tacky or anything. I think, Danny boy, I might have a better idea. Gerald lay beneath the covers and listened to the snores coming from the living room. He couldn't be sure if it was a trap or not, but his mother had stopped crying, and that was a blessing. He looked at the floor of his bedroom and tried to find the string, seeing a pulsating orange line that extended into the hallway. Orange wasn't red. Orange was only slightly dangerous. But the pulsating made him think that time wasn't quite right yet. He yawned, not sure what time it was, but knowing it was early. He had dozed off for a little. He couldn't be sure how long. The old and battered Mickey Mouse alarm clock on the nightstand told him that it was about 3 a.m., but he wasn't entirely sure what time he had come back in through the hole in the floor. He rubbed a fist against his eyes, wincing as the pain moved through him. The first bruise was gone, but it hadn't been the last. The first one had been noticed by his teacher, Mrs. Castleberry. He had tried to hide it, not wanting his mother and father to get in trouble, but a black eye was harder to hide than bruises on your arms and legs. All his teachers knew that Gerald was not prone to fights and generally got along with his classmates. He had a way about him that often kept him away from bullies and gravitated him towards people who would be his friends. They also knew that Gerald's father had become mean as of late, refusing to help with class activities and generally being hostile to anyone who called the house to remind him of functions or parent-teacher nights. Many of them had suspected that his father had been abusing him for a few years now, and the size of that shiner that he now bore made them believe that he had finally taken it too far. When Mrs. Castleberry had asked him to stay after class, he'd been afraid that he'd done poorly on the last geography test he'd taken. It turned out it was much worse than that. "Gerald," she said, trying to be diplomatic, "I couldn't help but notice your injury. Are you feeling okay?" "Oh, this?" Gerald said, trying to laugh it off. It's nothing. I fell down the porch steps," he said, grasping for something that would sound believable. Mrs. Castleberry gave him a "we both know better than that" look, but proceeded on. "Oh my, well, I hope your parents took you to the hospital afterwards. Head wounds like that can have underlying effects on you as well." "Yes, ma'am," Gerald hedged, "only they weren't home when I fell. I showed them when they got home, and since I wasn't feverish or dizzy, they said it was probably okay. Mom checked in on me throughout the night, and I guess I was just fine." "That's good," she said, though Gerald didn't think she really believed him. "Gerald, I think a great deal of you. A lot of your teachers think a lot of you, too. You're a joy to teach and a bright young man. Being as bright as you are, I know you know the difference between the truth and a lie." "Of course, Mrs. Castleberry," Gerald said, but I haven't lied to you. I really did. Gerald, I can see the knuckle ridges under your left eyebrow. You can be honest with me. If your father is hurting you, then it needs to stop." Gerald had begun to feed her the same line a second time, but that's when he saw the string. Right around her stomach, looking for all the world like a weird intestine as it flowed from her, was a blue string. Gerald had learned to trust the strings more than he trusted people. He'd seen one attached to Kevin when he first met him, and knew they were meant to be best friends. He had seen one attached to Mr. Turner, and even though he hadn't known him, he would have surely failed the second grade if he hadn't trusted him. It wasn't that Gerald was dumb, not by any stretch, but he was distractible. The strings often kept him distracted, watching as they zoomed off in every direction, but Mr. Turner had helped him with that. "I had a similar problem when I was your age," he confided, though Gerald hadn't told him about the strings. "Everything was more interesting than school, and I had to find a way to clear my mind. When you feel like that, just close your eyes and breathe in deep, then push everything out and find your peace." That had helped, and Mr. Turner had helped him with other things too, and that had helped him get through the fractions and grammar and memorizing state capitals. Then there was Mrs. Castleberry, an adult that he had thought would just sail in and out of his life, until right this moment. She had the blue string, and that meant that she was important. He could feel the tears coming, and he didn't want them to. "It isn't his fault. He's been in a lot of pain since he fell off the truck." He told her the whole story, the abuse and all, and 1,000 excuses for his father besides. He made it pretty clear that he didn't blame his dad for any of this, and it must be the pain or his behavior, and not that his dad was a bad guy. He loved his dad, despite how he acted, and he remembered fondly the times they'd played catch or cars, or when he'd fixed his balsa wood glider with tape and they'd played airport in the backyard. He laid it all out, and when he was done, she said it would be okay and that she could fix it. He realized too late that the string was orange now, and that he had messed everything up. Mrs. Castleberry had called Child Protective Services, and that had been bad. They had called his parents to let them know that he was going into protective care, and that was worse. His dad had told him 100 times what happened to kids in CPS. Kids died there. Kids got worse than dead there, and Gerald knew that if he went, something bad would happen to him. They took him down to the Department of Children and Families in the big building downtown, the one you went to see the judge in. He sat in the same room as his parents and listened as Mrs. Castleberry told the CPS lady how she had noticed bruises as he tried so hard to hide them. She'd seen them, seen how he limped sometimes, but she had never had any solid proof. "When I saw the bruise around his eye, however, I know that someone had finally gone too far." Then Mr. Turner had come in, and Gerald realized that everyone had known, despite how much he had tried to hide it. It wasn't as bad when he was in my class. His father's accident wouldn't occur until the 3rd grade, but I saw them over the years. Bruises on his arms were hard to miss, especially when I worked so closely with him. Sometimes he winced when he sat down. Sometimes he limped a little, though he tried to hide it. But mostly it was the way he craved praise. When his eyes lit up, you could tell there wasn't a lot of praise at home. Sometimes, and it broke my heart to see it, he would flinch away from me when I would lift a hand to pat his shoulder or his back. Someone had been hurting him, but I had hoped it wasn't his father. He idolized his father. It was pretty easy to tell, and the thought that his hero was giving them these injuries was horrific. They had turned to Gerald then, wanting him to tell them what had happened. Mrs. Castleberry had prepared him for this. He would have to tell them what his father had done. Then he could be removed from the situation. He had hoped that maybe she would take him in, but she had shaken her head sadly when he suggested it and told him she wasn't in a position to take in children right now. "My apartment isn't big enough for me most of the time. No, very likely they'll put you in a foster home for a while. With any luck, your mother will prove a better caregiver than your father, and you can go back to living with her." "Just long enough for someone to mess you up worse than I ever could," the voice of his father had said in his head. His father had assured him that foster homes would make the torture he received at home look like child's play. They would break his bones. They would burn him. They would touch him in places the TV shows said they shouldn't be touched, and everything in between. He wouldn't have his mother there to take the beatings for him, and he would suffer constantly. Gerald didn't care, though. If it would get his father taken away so he couldn't hurt his mother or him anymore, then it would be worth it. He got up, prepared to tell them what had happened, but one look at his father, and the words curdled in his throat. He was smiling, his face a mask of serenity, and his eyes held all the crazy light of a desert hermit. Those eyes promised Gerald that no matter what he did, he'd find him. He could live with a family in the North Pole, could live with a family on the moon, and he would still find him. He would drag him home, he would kill whatever family was hiding him, and he would hurt Gerald worse than he ever had. Looking at him now, Gerald found he couldn't tell the truth. Looking at his father as he sat quietly across from him, Gerald was forced to fall back on his comfortable lies. Worst of all was the blue string that now connected the two of them. The blue string that let him know that his dear old dad was still good for something. I don't know what they're talking about. I fell down the stairs. I hurt myself. I'm accident prone. Please don't take me away from my family. I want to go home. I want to go home. Please, just let me go home. As he said it, Gerald maintained eye contact with his father, begging him not to hold a grudge and let him come home. The CPS officer only shrugged, telling the two teachers that without a witness, there was no crime. Gerald went home with his parents in the end, and Mr. Turner and Mrs. Castleberry stood watching him go like a mirror of his own parents. They didn't look angry at Gerald, only sad and worried about the boy that they had almost freed. Gerald blinked hard, his eyes heavy, but if he fell asleep now, he might never wake up again. The string was working its way back to blue, but if he was going to catch it, then he needed to be ready. Something about the string made him think that today was the day that something good was going to happen, and if he missed it, then it might be his last opportunity. He had to trust in the string. It had gotten him this far, and he really had nothing else to trust in. His father had waited till the trailer door closed, and then began his evening torture. Gerald was subject to a beating like nothing he had ever seen before, and all of it was topped off by the constant stream of demoralization that flowed from his father. He could smell the acrid smell of cooking meth, the burning plastic of a roasted extension cord mixed with the pissy smell of overcooked bleach and his own blood in his nose. He suddenly knew the source of his father's rage. He had stopped long enough to look sane for the meeting with the CPS, but now he was looking forward to beating his son, who had dared to defy him, and cap it off by knocking his wife around and pulling that poison into his lungs and falling into a drug-induced euphoria. Gerald had passed out on the floor that night, waking up in his bed the next morning to be informed that he had been taken out of school. He was homeschooled now, and would be for as long as it took anyone to forget that bruise, or his name, or anything else about him. That had been the first time that Gerald had tried to escape, he reflected with a yawn, and as he drifted off again, he also reflected that it wasn't the last. The door to the manager's trailer had come open relatively easy for someone the feds suspected of being the tri-state area's major supplier of methamphetamines. Tanner had expected a gun in his face or a snarling dog, hell, even a chain lock, but the door had crashed open after only a single kick to reveal a very empty office. The trailer was mostly for show, he suspected, and Vernon Graff, the drug kingpin of the trailer court, was likely shacked up with whatever bad-skinned waif he could find his way into. With the product he was supposed to be pumping out, she might even have half her teeth if he was lucky. Tanner and his less-than-eager accomplice had fallen on the filing cabinets in the adjoining room like flies on dung. The trailer court wasn't huge, maybe 50 units, and though Mr. Graff was a decent drug manufacturer, his bookkeeping was subpar. His debt records, however, were on point, and Tanner soon had the information that he was looking for. There were about 20 kids in the trailer court, some families even having more than one. The place was mostly for guys who worked at the steel mill or the paper mill, and the number of families here was surprisingly low. Of those 20 kiddos, about 12 of them were boys, the gender Ridley had designated. Of the 12, 4 were in high school, which put them right out, and 3 weren't in school at all, which also put them out. That left just 5 kiddos to go through. Not bad odds, all things considered. "We can start with the Neely house. It's 2 rows over," and Tanner began, before he was so rudely interrupted by the loud caw of an angry drunk. "What the hell is this?" came a voice from the front, presumably Vernon, after staggering in from whatever trailer he had been entertaining the night before. A quick look at his watch showed Tanner that it was nearly 5 a.m., and the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon just a little bit. They'd taken too long, even with Danvers' trained eye for info, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. He flicked his head at Danvers, telling him to get beside the door, and as Tanner drew his Glock and made ready, he felt that same stab of exhilaration shoot through him that always preceded violence. Maybe he'd have to hurt the guy, maybe even kill him. Danvers looked unsure as he held up his Sig Sauer in a shaking hand, but Tanner was cool as a cucumber. This was the work that he enjoyed. "When I catch you miserable sons of bitches, I swear to God I'll string you up in the yard. Is that you, Trevor, you coked up little slag? I swear to God, if you're trying to rob me, I'll bruise your face up so bad that none of your bears will want to..." He pushed the thin little door harder than he strictly needed to, and came into the office like a charging water buffalo. The door crashed into Danvers, the little man making a sound before bumping into the wall, and when Vernon Graff turned to see what it had been, Tanner hit him with the butt of his gun on the back of the head. A few minutes later, Vernon had an even ruder awakening as someone threw vodka in his face from a nearby mini-fridge. By then, he was tied into his office chair with extension cords, and the sun was less of an idea and more of a promise for the near future. Tanner wasn't a little guy, but it had taken him and Danvers both to get the bulk of the meth-dealing landlord into his chair. The vodka, he was hoping, would sting his eyes and make him less likely to ID the two, though that really didn't matter. When you worked for the black site, your records looked like someone had gotten a little goofy with a black marker anyway. "Good morning, Mr. Graff," Danvers said, using his calm and delicate accountant's voice. "This won't take long. We just need to ask you a few..." Vernon Graff spat a lot of spittle and foul-smelling vodka into his face, and Danvers' next words were lost amongst a lot of coughing and huffing. "Screw you! You ain't got nothing! I ain't got nothing for you stupid druggos here! Get the hell out! Right now! Before I..." But his bluster was lost as the cold nose of Tanner's Glock found the thick and arthritis-kissed left knee that Vernon was bouncing without realizing it. The bouncing stopped as he spoke. "Looks like civility's off the table, Danny boy. Now then, Vern, either you answer my questions, or you will have to learn to chase trailer park jailbait and cook your poison with only one working knee. Do we have an understanding?" Vernon opened his broken-toothed maw, likely to deliver something angry and stupid that would leave him with a bullet wound, but he closed his lips around it and nodded instead. Well, Tanner thought, he'd be dipped. You can teach an old dog new tricks. "We're looking for a kid, about 10 or 11, who might possess some weird abilities. Nothing too weird. Maybe he moves stuff around. Maybe he guesses a little too well. Maybe he avoids you like the plague because he knows you're thinking about taking more than his lunch money." Vernon bristled again, but the cold nose of the gun doused his anger a bit. "Either way, we want him. We'll find him. The question is, are the cops going to find you with a sock in your mouth and tape holding it in, or a nice fat bullet hole in your skull? Either way, they'll never catch us. We're ghosts, Vern, and we don't catch easy." "I don't know nobody like that," Vern answered, too hastily, Tanner thought. "Think real hard, Vern," he said, taking the gun off his knee and putting it up against the fat wattle of his neck that covered his chin. "Think really hard, 'cause there's a 1911 in your desk drawer over there, and a 9mm slug is a 9mm slug, especially when the weapon's in your hand and the suicide note is so convincing." The gun shook, but it had nothing to do with Tanner's grip. "I don't know," Vern begged, beginning to cry big, greasy tears. "I don't know anyone like that. Kids around here are half inbred. They barely pass high school, let alone have weird powers. The McCluskey brat has a webbed foot. Forrester girl has a lazy eye. The Nemo brat has a colostomy bag 'cause his shitter doesn't work right. Is that what you're after? None of them are special, but you can take all of them. Only don't kill me. I don't want to..." He paused as Tanner reached up and pulled the slide back, ejecting a bullet which he caught and palmed. 10 seconds, Vernon. We can find him without you, but why not make it easy?" "I don't know," he wailed, afraid to move too much. The sound of a drawer opening roughly made him shudder. 9. "Brad Neary's kid has an eye for ball pitches," Vernon shuddered out. The cold barrel of the Glock went away, but it was replaced with the familiar barrel of the 1911. 8, Tanner intoned. The Glibson girl has a mouth like a Hoover," he practically squealed. 7, Tanner called, working the slide and checking for ammo. Just his luck, a full clip. 6, he said, Vernon reduced to blubbering by this point. 5, 4, 3, "Gerald Worley!" he screeched, holding his hands up as much as he could to stop the counting. "Couldn't hear that," Tanner said, wedging the gun into his wattles. "Want to try again?" "Gerald Worley," Vernon panted. "Milton Worley's kid. I've watched him follow weird paths like my grandma used to do with a divining rod when I was little. She was looking for water, but I don't know what this kid's looking for. Sometimes he seems to follow stuff only he can see. And one time, I saw him follow it to a grate where he found $1 in time for the ice cream truck to roll by. I asked him once what he was doing, and he said he was following the strings. I don't know what that means, but it was so weird that it stuck with me, you know?" Tanner took the gun away, nodding as he thought about it. Gerald could see the ways that fate might take. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Graff," Tanner said, hitting him with the butt of his own gun hard enough to crack his skull. Vernon Graff wouldn't die, not that day, but he would spend a few days in the hospital after his secretary came in to find him unconscious and bleeding on the carpet a half hour later. Tanner's prints wouldn't be found anywhere, and the whole thing would be chalked up to a robbery. Vernon would be very vocal about how they had been the ones to abduct Gerald Worley, probably hoping for a reward of some kind. Whether they believed him or not, Gerald would be long gone by then. Gerald snorted awake, cursing himself for falling asleep. The blue string was probably throbbing now, and as he got out of bed, he was through the hole and under the skirting in a heartbeat. He had his bag, his meager possessions, and a thick blue string to guide him. This was it. This was his destiny. He was going to make it out of here. He was going to... The string led into the road, and that's how the white panel van came to be in his path, just in time for him to run smack dab into it. The only two more surprised than Gerald were Agents Danver and Agent Tanner. They had quite literally run smack into the boy that they were looking for, and the hit had been hard enough to knock him out cold. Gerald would come awake in a very different bed, surrounded by strangers, to the sound of a little girl crying. Gerald was the last student of this year's kindergarten class, and school was about to be in session. It was the strangest thing, but this is definitely the kid that Graff was talking about. Security Chief Ridley smiled, the effect enough to make his old students' blood run cold when they had reason to see it. You'd be surprised how many times things like this happen in our line of work. He was thinking about another potential kindergarten alumni who was coming in with his dropout mother. The two finally reunited after so long. These coincidences were normal for people in their line of work. Even so, Danvers said, trying to make the conversation sound normal but letting his trepidation slip through, I'd wager that not many other snatch squads have the targets run into their transport and knock themselves out. Ridley nodded. That one was different. He let the silence slip by, knowing it would make Danver uncomfortable and wanting to hear him squirm a little. Charles Danver had been a squirmy little maggot when he had taken up residence at the site, a small child who had been hard to break of pissing his pants and stuttering ceaselessly. His parents had been more than happy to get rid of him, and Ridley had been happy to take him in. For a worm, he spoke like a king when he needed to, and he was a whiz with numbers. Even so, Ridley liked to listen to him squirm. So, anyway, we should be back at the site in 48 hours. We have enough drugs to keep him under, and his head injury looks superficial at best. For your sake, Danny boy, I hope so. If that kid dies of a brain bleed, then you can be my newest student in the kindergarten. Imagine how silly you'll look, trying to fit in with the kids, barely in middle school. Danver laughed, but there was no humor behind it. Till then, Ridley said, and hung up on him before he could respond. Looking at the roster on his computer, he ticked another box and smiled as a result. Of the 25 potential students, they had received 20. That was pretty good. 80% was well within parameters, but he had conducted class with less. By the end, there would be less anyway, and that too was expected and acceptable. He would burn them out, they would take their own lives, some might even kill each other. This was expected and acceptable. This year's class will be most interesting, Ridley said, the lights of the screen turning his glasses into a glare-blind window. He had no idea how prophetic those words would be.